The Shadow Sovereign of Quill. Act 4, The 7 Damaged Hubs. Chapter 25, The Map Between Worlds. Day 1 of Phase 2. The map was not a map in any conventional sense. It occupied the full surface of the whiteboard Rias had installed in the East Study 3 weeks ago, when it became clear that the Hub 1 inheritance contained more architectural information than any single notebook could hold. Issei had transferred the data twice. First from the system overlay into a hand-drawn schematic, then from that schematic into the whiteboard format that Rias and Kiba could read without triggering the visual processing load that came with accessing the overlay directly. 7 circles. Connected by lines that were not roads but dimensional stress vectors. Each circle represented a hub. Hub 1, which they had cleared, sat in the upper left. Its circle was solid. The other 6 were outlined in red. Issei stood at the board at 0547 before the rest of the house woke, and ran through the numbers for the 4th time since returning from the inheritance chamber. Hub 2, southeastern Kyoto. Estimated depth below the surface overlay, 40 meters. Last activation signature, 112 years ago. Damage classification, structural collapse in the outer ring, inner core intact. Hub 3, northern Aomori, coastal shelf. Estimated depth, 80 meters below sea level. Last activation, 203 years ago. Damage classification, invader imposed seal, energy signature suppressed but not eliminated. Hub 4, Central Mountain Range, Nagano Prefecture. Last activation, 407 years ago. Damage classification unknown. The prior sovereign's records contained only a single line about Hub 4, do not enter alone. Hub 5, offshore, roughly 40 kilometers from Fukuoka. Entirely submerged. Last activation, 160 years ago. Damage classification, invader conversion partial, inner architecture preserved. Hub 6, Okinawa region, island shelf. Last activation, 89 years ago. Damage classification, active invader occupation. This one was not damaged. This one was held. Hub 7, location indeterminate. The prior sovereign's records listed only coordinates that placed it somewhere in the East China Sea, but the gate speaker had flagged the coordinate data as possibly corrupted by the conversion process. Hub 7 might not be findable by conventional means. 7 hubs. 2 to 4 years of work, the inheritance had estimated. Issei looked at the board and thought the estimate was optimistic. Rias found him at 0712, when she came downstairs to find the East Study light on and the door ajar. She paused in the doorway for 3 seconds before entering, which Issei had come to recognize as her processing pause, the moment when she was reading a room before deciding how to enter it. You have been here since before 5, she said. It was not a question. The inheritance data needed a second structural analysis. The first pass missed a constraint in the Hub 6 approach sequence. She moved to stand beside him and studied the board. She was still in the dark red robe she wore in the mornings, her hair loose, which meant she had come from her room directly without stopping for the formal presentation she maintained during school hours. Issei noted this without attaching significance to it. Hub 6 is occupied, she said. Actively occupied. The invader installation there is not a dormant remnant. It is staffed. He pointed to the lower section of the board where he had written the gate speaker's direct language in block letters. Continuous invader presence confirmed. Approach requires clearance of surface installation first. The prior sovereign never attempted Hub 6. The conversion work completed before his operational timeline reached it. Then we addressed the others first. In order of complexity, yes. Hub 2 first. It is the closest, structurally the most intact, and the repair work is the most well documented in the inheritance. He stepped back from the board and looked at the full picture. I want to move within 3 weeks. Rias folded her arms and looked at Hub 4's entry in the red outline, the one with the prior sovereign's single-line notation beside it. Issei had written the notation in full, do not enter alone. What do you think that means? She asked. It means the prior sovereign attempted it once and survived with something to say about it. It does not mean it is impossible. He picked up the marker and added a small notation beneath Hub 4. It means we prepare more than we would for any of the others. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the peerage will want to know the full picture. Briefing at 9. Full data. She nodded once, and then she went to make tea, and Issei returned to the board. The briefing ran 1 hour and 40 minutes. Kiba sat forward for the entire duration and asked 7 questions, each one precise and operationally relevant. Kaneko asked 2, both about Hub 4, both about the prior sovereign's notation, and Issei answered both honestly. He did not know what the notation meant. He knew only what the notation said. Asia asked about the Hub 3 seal and whether it could be approached while active or required the seal broken first, and Issei told her it required breaking, which was a reason Hub 3 was third on the list rather than second. Akeno did not ask questions during the briefing but made 3 corrections to his timeline calculations, all of them mathematically accurate, which he incorporated immediately and acknowledged in front of the group. Rias listened to all of it, and at the end said, "What do we need that we do not have?" Issei had prepared this section. He read from the list he had written at 0623, during the gap between his second and third pass over the board. Intelligence on Hub 2's current state. The inheritance data is 112 years old. The structure may have changed. I want eyes on the site before we commit to an approach vector. He looked at Kiba. Shadow relay through Kage, extended range, 48-hour survey. Understood. Diplomatic positioning. The Pillar Assembly granted independent territorial sovereign status within their jurisdiction. Hub 2 sits in Kyoto. The Kyoto Devil community has its own governance structure. I want a communication sent to Lady Asaka before we move. Rias raised an eyebrow. Lady Asaka is Yukai, not Devil. Her jurisdiction is recognized as independent of the Pillar Assembly, which is why we communicate rather than notify. We are guests in Kyoto. The Pillar Assembly recognition does not extend there. He moved to the next line. Third, medical preparedness. Hub 1 required Sovereign's grace at 3 separate points. Hub 2 is structurally damaged. Collapse risk means injury scenarios that current recovery protocols are not optimized for. Asia straightened in her chair. I can review the protocols. I would like you to rewrite them. Not review. You have more operational experience with the grace overlap now than when we wrote the originals. She nodded, and something settled in her expression that was not quite pride but was close to it. Fourth, Serorg. The room shifted slightly. Kaneko glanced at Rias. Rias kept her eyes on Issei. He agreed to support the map distribution. He is a political asset and an operational one. For Hub 6, which is actively occupied and will require the largest force commitment of any hub on the list, I want him as a confirmed partner before we reach that phase. He closed the notebook. That conversation happens before we move on Hub 2. Not after, Rias said. I will arrange the call. Thank you. He looked around the table. No one had the expression of someone who had just been handed too much. That was important to note. 3 weeks, he said. We can be ready. The call with Serorg came the following afternoon. Issei sat at the East study desk and watched the screen as Serorg's face appeared, direct and without ceremony the way it always was, and he thought again that Serorg-Bale was the easiest political relationship he had yet managed because Serorg was interested only in what things actually were, not in what they appeared to be. The Hub 6 situation, Serorg said, after Issei had outlined the 7-hub picture in the same structured format he had used for the peerage. Actively staffed. Yes. How many? Unknown. The gate speaker's intelligence on Hub 6 is older than on the others. The last reliable figure was from the prior sovereign's era and placed the garrison at between 40 and 80 invader-class entities, not including apex-tier commanders. Serorg was quiet for 4 seconds. That is not a peerage operation. No. That is why I am having this conversation now, before we reach Hub 6, rather than when we are outside the door. Issei kept his tone level. I do not know what the exact force requirement will be. I know it exceeds what the Gremory peerage can provide alone. I am mapping that gap now. You want a joint commitment. I want to know whether a joint commitment is possible in principle. The details are negotiable. The principle is not, because without it, Hub 6 is not addressable. Serorg leaned forward slightly, and the quality of his attention sharpened the way it had during the spar in the East Field. "Tell me about the prior sovereign." Issei had expected this question. He had prepared an answer. He was devil-adjacent, not pure devil. The inheritance archive did not specify the bloodline. He held the sovereign designation for approximately 30 years before his final operation, which was Hub 6 containment. The containment failed in the sense that the invaders were not destroyed but succeeded in the sense that they were sealed behind a boundary that has held for 4 to 6 centuries. He paused. He did not survive the sealing. Serorg absorbed this. He sealed them in from the inside. That is my interpretation of the records. Another pause. Then Hub 6 is not just a clearance operation. It is a reversal of what cost the prior sovereign everything. Yes. Serorg leaned back. His expression was not grave, exactly, but it had the quality of genuine consideration that was different from political calculation. I will commit to joint planning on Hub 6. Force composition to be determined as your intelligence picture develops. But I want one condition. Name it. I am present for the operation itself. Not coordinating from outside. Inside. Issei looked at him across the screen and thought about what that meant operationally, and about what it meant in terms of Serorg Bale's understanding of what the prior sovereign had sacrificed, and about the fact that this was not the response of a political actor but of someone who had made a personal decision before the conversation began. Agreed, he said. Chapter 26, Kyoto. The second hub. The Kage relay came back after 41 hours with a picture that matched the inheritance data in structure, and differed from it in 3 significant ways. Hub 2's outer ring had not merely collapsed. It had collapsed inward, and in the 6 centuries since the collapse, the dimensional stress of the inward pressure had created a second outer barrier, not built, not designed, but accreted. A crystal shell of compressed space, dark and refractive, surrounding the original structure like a second skin grown over a wound. The inheritance data had no record of this because it had not existed when the prior sovereign last accessed the hub. The second difference was internal. The inner core, which the inheritance data had described as intact, showed a faint pulse. Not a heartbeat, not a mechanical rhythm, but something between them, periodic and low, like a sleeping system running a background diagnostic. The hub was not fully dormant. The third difference was the gate speaker's presence. It was waiting at the boundary of the hub, visible through the relay, a form that was not quite a shape but occupied the space where a shape would be. Issei recognized it from Hub 1 and from the perimeter meetings in the weeks since. The gate speaker communicated in patterns, not language. But it had been waiting. He called Rias into the East study at 1600 and showed her the relay data. It knew we were coming, she said. It knew we would come eventually. The prior sovereign cleared Hub 1, which meant Phase 2 was initiated. The gate speaker serves the network. It is positioning itself where the next approach will occur. The crystal shell changes the approach. I had planned a direct entry through the outer ring collapse point. That approach assumed the collapse was simple structural damage. The shell is not structural damage. It is a defense mechanism, even if it was not designed as one. He pulled up his analysis from the morning. We can break through it, but breaking it creates a pressure differential that could destabilize the inner ring before we reach the core. We need to find the shell's natural seam first. And the gate speaker? Useful. If it can communicate the seam location, we save 2 to 3 hours of perimeter work. He closed the relay file. We leave Thursday. The Yasaka communication was acknowledged this morning. She has noted our approach and expressed neither welcome nor objection, which in Yukai diplomatic language means proceed but do not make a spectacle of it. Rias allowed a small expression that might have been amusement. You research Yukai diplomatic norms. The archive Serorg provided contained a section on interspecies diplomatic language. I read it on Tuesday. Of course you did, she said, without any particular tone, and went to inform the peerage of the Thursday departure. They arrived in Kyoto by overnight train, occupying 2 reserved compartments, and Issei spent most of the journey in the aisle seat with his eyes closed and the system overlay running across the back of his vision, mapping the approach geometry against the relay data he had memorized. Drake was quiet until the train passed through the mountains north of Osaka, and then he said, without preface, the pulse. The hub's background rhythm. What about it? It is not a diagnostic. I have been listening to it through the relay recording since you played it. That rhythm is communication. It is broadcasting something, very quietly, to whatever is equipped to receive it. Issei opened his eyes and looked at the dark window. The inner core is broadcasting. It has been broadcasting for some time. Possibly since the outer ring collapsed. The pulse pattern is too regular for environmental variation. What is it broadcasting to? To the network. To the other hubs. A pause that had weight in it. To you now. You carry the Hub 1 inheritance. You are a valid recipient. Issei processed this. Can you translate it? I can try. It will take longer than the journey. But I believe the signal is a damage report. Hub 2 has been telling the network what happened to it for 600 years, and the network has had no one to receive the message. The train moved through the mountain pass, and the lights of the next valley appeared below, and Issei looked at them for a moment before speaking again. Tell me when you have something. I will. He closed his eyes again. Across the aisle, Kaneko had fallen asleep with her knees drawn up to her chest. Kiba sat reading a paperback with a penlight held low. Asia had a small travel pillow against the window, and her breathing was even. Akeno was in the second compartment with Rias. Issei ran the approach geometry again and added a variable he had not included before. The hub is awake, and it knows we are coming, and it has been waiting for someone to answer 600 years of signal. The approach geometry was unchanged. But what came after it might be different from what he had planned. The site was 40 meters below a quiet hillside in the northeastern part of the city, accessible through a basement-level maintenance passage in a building that the inheritance data had flagged as carrying a mild concealment field over its lower levels. The building appeared, to anyone without system-level perception, to be a small historical archive with modest visitor traffic and a closed lower level under renovation. The gate speaker was at the maintenance passage entrance. It manifested differently here than it had at Hub 1. At Hub 1 it had been a presence at a threshold, formal and still. Here it was closer, and the pattern of its presence was more active, something between attentive and urgent. Issei stood in front of the maintenance passage entrance with the peerage behind him, and read the pattern for 20 seconds before speaking. It wants us to move quickly. Why? Akeno asked. I do not know yet. But urgency in the gate speaker is new. It was patient at Hub 1. He looked at the passage. The seam. I need the seam location. The pattern shifted. It was not language, and it was not an image, but it carried directional information the way temperature carries information about proximity, and Issei oriented to it, and marked the location in the system overlay, 37 degrees east of the central collapse point, at the third ring junction, where two stress lines intersected. Got it. He turned to Kiba. Entry order. Kage leads with Shadow Scout, then Kiba and Kaneko sweep the outer shell corridor once we are through the seam, then Asia, then Akeno and me, then Rias holding the perimeter anchor from position 4. Rias said understood. The passage was narrow enough that they moved single file. The concealment field pressed against Issei's perception at the transition point where the maintenance architecture ended and the hub structure began, and then it released, and the full-dimensional space opened around them. Even the second time, in a different hub, the scale was something that required a moment. Hub 2 was smaller than Hub 1 but felt more alive. The crystal shell that the relay had shown as exterior was visible from the inside as a curved ceiling of compressed light, dark blue and slow-moving, like the inside of a deep wave. The outer ring was collapsed, rubble piled in geometric heaps that the centuries had settled into near-natural arrangements. But beyond the outer ring, the inner architecture rose intact, 3 concentric layers of structured dimensional space, each layer slightly brighter than the one surrounding it, and from the center the pulse. Now audible as a subsonic pressure in the chest, not painful but present and rhythmic, and undeniably deliberate. That is the broadcasting signal, Drake said. I can decode it now that we are inside. Give me 20 minutes. You have 10, Issei said. We need to be at the core before whatever the gate speaker is urgent about becomes a problem. Then I will try for 8. The outer ring clearance took 11 minutes, not because of combat. There were no invader remnants in Hub 2's outer ring, but because the rubble was dimensionally unstable and 3 sections required Kage to scout the structural load before the group could cross. Kaneko handled 2 of the crossings by moving the rubble directly, a careful and precise operation that Issei watched with the overlay active to confirm no secondary collapse risk. At the scene location, exactly where the gate speaker's directional pattern had indicated, a gap in the crystal shell ran floor to ceiling, narrow but navigable, its edges smooth with the particular smoothness of something that had been under constant pressure long enough to polish itself. Issei went through first. The pressure differential was real. He felt it as a brief compression against his chest and ears, 2 seconds of equilibration, and then the inner ring's air pressure asserted itself and the discomfort passed. He turned and guided the others through by voice and position, hand on Asia's shoulder at the transition point because she was the most likely to lose orientation in the compression zone, and then they were all inside the inner ring and the crystal shell curved around them like a dome. Drag. The signal is a status report and a request. Hub 2 sustained outer ring collapse 408 years ago, confirmed with the inheritance data. The request component is what I am still working through. It is longer than the status report. Keep working. They moved through the second ring without incident, and reached the third ring wall at the 19-minute mark. The third ring wall in Hub 1 had been a single gate layer. Here it was 3 concentric seal arrays, each one carrying the prior sovereign's structural signature in the corners, and between the first and second seal arrays, a modification that was not the prior sovereign's. Issei stopped. Someone else was here after the prior sovereign. Kiba moved up beside him and examined the modification. The seal structure is different. The layering technique is more recent, within the last 200 years. The inheritance data marks the prior sovereign's work at 4+ centuries. Issei ran the system overlay across the modification. The pattern it returned was not invader origin, not devil, not human. Yukai. The room absorbed this. Lady Yasaka, Rias said from the perimeter position, or someone acting with her knowledge. Issei studied the seal. It was reinforcing work, careful and well executed, adding a secondary containment layer around the prior sovereign's original. This is protective. Someone came here, found the hub in a damaged state, and added containment to prevent the inner core from degrading further. He stepped back. That is why the hub has maintained a signal for 6 centuries. Someone has been maintaining the conditions for it to do so, Akeno said quietly. We should thank her. After, Issei said. We work first. The core chamber in Hub 2 was smaller than Hub 1's and its contents were different. Where Hub 1 had contained the prior sovereign's legacy in the form of an architectural blueprint and a voice message, Hub 2 contained what Issei could only describe as a working library. Dimensional data in compressed form, stacked in the system overlay like files in a directory, each one labeled in the same archival shorthand as the inheritance data. And at the center of the chamber, in the spot where Hub 1's matrix had held the message, a single crystalline node, pulsing slowly, broadcasting its 600-year status report to a network that had finally sent someone to receive it. Issei placed his hand on the node. The signal stopped. The silence afterward was not empty. It was resolved, the particular quiet of a thing that has been waiting to be finished and finally has been. The system registered the contact and began the access protocol, a slower process than Hub 1's inheritance, because the library was large, but the first index loaded within 30 seconds and Issei could see the scope of what was here. Hub 2 contained the invader's original entry records. Not the prior sovereign's observations about them. The invader's own documentation of their arrival, their survey of the dimensional network, their assessment of which hubs were viable for conversion and which were not, and their initial contact with the entity the prior sovereign had called the Grail Shard. He read the first index entry twice to be certain he had understood it. Then he said, Drag. I see it. The Grail Shard was not originally part of the hub network. No, Drag said. According to their own records, it was already here when they arrived. They found it inside Hub 2's inner core. They attempted to extract it. It refused extraction and then embedded itself in the first available sacred gear signature it could reach. A pause in the chamber. Someone was processing this. Several someones. That would have been Kiba began. The last holder before Issei, Rias said quietly. The girl named Raynare found. The one in the basement. No. Issei read the entry again. The embedding sequence is older than that. The invaders arrived in Hub 2 6 to 7 centuries ago, based on this documentation. The Grail shard embedded itself in a sacred gear holder at that time. It has passed between holders since then, moving each time its host died, looking for a viable long-term location. He looked at the data. It found one. The silence in the chamber was different now. It chose you, Asia said. From among everyone who has held a sacred gear in 700 years. It identified the boosted gear as a viable permanent environment, and waited for an opportunity to make contact. Issei lifted his hand from the node. The access protocol had completed its first phase transfer. The rest would integrate over the next 72 hours. Which means it is not a fragment of something. It is a complete entity that has been traveling. And it is inside you, Kaneko said, in the flat tone she used when stating things she found alarming but would not show. It was inside me before we met. We simply did not know what it was. He turned from the node. This changes the structural picture significantly. I need time to read the rest of the library. How much time? Rias asked. Days. Not hours. He looked around the chamber. But the hub is stable. Lady Yasaka's work held the core intact. We seal and exit now, and I read in transit. They sealed. They exited. The crystal shell curved over them on the way out, dark blue and slow, and Issei thought about what it meant to carry something that had been looking for a home for 700 years and had finally decided that he was it. He thought about it, and then he set it aside, and focused on the step in front of him, because that was how the work got done. Chapter 27. What the Grail Shard Remembers. Transit and Revelation. They spent 2 nights in Kyoto. Rias arranged accommodations at a quiet inn near the eastern hills, the kind of place that did not ask questions of guests who kept unusual hours and occasionally caused a brief pressure change in the air of their room. Issei sat at the low writing desk each night with the Hub 2 library integrating through the system overlay and read the translated index entries in the order they appeared. The first night's reading covered the invaders' survey period. They had arrived through a dimensional transit point that was not any of the 7 hubs, an approach vector the prior sovereign had never identified and the inheritance data had not documented. They had taken 8 months to survey the full hub network before beginning conversion work. During those 8 months they had encountered the Grail Shard in Hub 2 and attempted extraction 4 times, each attempt producing what their records described as a full network rejection cascade that had damaged the approach vector and prevented them from bringing reinforcements through it for 60 years. The Grail Shard had, on its own, set back the invasion by 6 decades. The second night's reading was harder to process. The Grail Shard's own history, as recovered from the invaders' documentation of their observation attempts, was not what the name suggested. It was not a fragment of anything. It was, as Drake had intuited, a complete entity, ancient beyond the invaders' own records, which meant ancient beyond any reference point currently available to Issei. The invaders had called it a network immune function, a system built into the dimensional infrastructure to resist unauthorized access, which had become self-aware at some point in its operational history and chosen mobility over the fixed installation it had been designed to occupy. A dimensions immune system, alive and aware and currently residing in Issei's left arm. He set the notebook down at 0300 and looked at the ceiling of the quiet room and thought about this for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, to the space in front of him, "Are you awake?" The response was not words. It was not quite sensation. It was the particular quality of attention that a room has when someone in it has just heard their name called, a shift in presence that had no sensory component he could name but was unambiguous. "I read the invaders' records about you." The attention quality shifted again. Something between acknowledgement and careful waiting. "You refused extraction because leaving Hub 2 would have left the core without a defense function." A response. Not words. Something like, "Yes, and also more than that," and the more is not something expressible in the format you use. "You have been communicating with me since integration." The vitality increase, the grace overlay. Those are functions. Yes. Do you have a name? A long pause. And then something that was not a word but carried the information that a word would carry. It had had a designation once, in the original system architecture. That designation had not been language. It translated, imperfectly, into something like keeper. Keeper, Issei said. I will use that. The acknowledgement was immediate. And in the acknowledgement was something else, something that resembled, in the way that a translated word resembles its source, relief. He sat with that for a moment. You have been traveling between sacred gear holders for 7 centuries, he said. Not looking for the strongest. Looking for the right one. The attention quality confirmed it, in its non-word way. What made me the right one? Another long pause. And then, with the careful imprecision of something translating itself into a format it was not designed for, the combination. Not power. Not intelligence. Not the boosted gear. The combination of all of it, plus the system, plus the way those things were being used, plus something it had no word for, something about the direction of intention. Issei thought about the word intention for a long time. Then he said, sleep, or whatever your equivalent is. We have work tomorrow. The present settled, like a deep tide going slack, and Issei lay back on the pillow and looked at the ceiling until his eyes closed. He told the peerage in the morning. Not all of it. The portion he told was the verifiable portion, what the Hub 2 library contained about the Grail Shard's history, what the invader's records documented about its nature, what that meant for the network's operational picture. He described it in the same structured briefing format he always used, and the peerage absorbed it in the same way they always absorbed difficult information, with varying expressions of processing time but without any of the destabilizing responses he might have seen 6 months ago. Asia said, she is part of the network's immune system. She was always supposed to be here. That is one interpretation. Is it wrong? Issei considered. It is not inaccurate. It is incomplete. Being part of the network's design does not mean the network designed this specific outcome. There is improvisation in it. Kaneko said, Keeper. Yes. Does Drake have a problem with a third presence? Drake answered before Issei could, a slightly unusual occurrence that indicated the question had been directed as much at him as at Issei. His voice came through low and clear, audible to the room. The dragon in me has a territorial instinct. I am aware of it, and I am not governed by it. Keeper has demonstrated, over months of coexistence, that she does not compete for function. She expands capacity. That is not a threat. A pause in the room. Akeno broke it. She said. It is the closest approximation the translation produces, Issei said. I am not certain it is precise. But Keeper did not object to it. No. Rias looked at the table for a moment, and then looked at Issei. The invader's transit point. The approach vector they used that the prior sovereign never found. Hub 2's library has partial coordinates. I need to cross-reference with the Hub 1 architectural blueprint to identify the full location. When I have it, we address it. An approach vector that the invaders used is also an approach vector that could be used again. By others. By others, he confirmed. Rias folded her hands on the table. How long? 2 weeks for the cross-reference. The library integration is not yet complete. Then we have 2 weeks before Hub 3. Yes. She nodded. Around the table, the peerage settled back to work, and outside the city of Kyoto moved through its ordinary morning without knowing anything had changed. He visited Lady Yasaka that afternoon. She was not what he had expected, though he had not been certain what to expect from the Kyoto Yukai leader. The diplomatic language summary in Serorg's archive had described her as formal, indirect in the classical court tradition, and capable of meaning 3 things simultaneously with a single sentence. He had prepared for a conversation that required close reading. What he found was a tall woman with fox ears and a composed intelligence that reminded him, in its quality if not its manner, of Rias at her most perceptive. She received him in a traditional room with low furniture and afternoon light, poured tea without ceremony, and said, You found the seal work. Yes. It held. It held perfectly. 6 centuries. She nodded once. My predecessor's work. It has been a family concern. He looked at her. Your family has maintained Hub 2's integrity for generations. We maintain what is under Kyoto. That is what it means to govern a territory. She sipped her tea. The Hub is part of the territory. We did not know its full function. We knew it was something that should not be allowed to collapse further. That knowledge, maintained across generations, is the reason the Hub library survived. A pause. The library? Hub 2 contained the invaders' own records. Their survey documentation. Their history of contact with the network immune function. If the inner core had degraded, those records would have been lost. He set his teacup down. Lady Yasaka, what your family did across 6 centuries is not a minor thing. I want to be direct about that. She was quiet for a moment, and her expression, which had been politely contained until this point, shifted into something more genuine. The prior sovereign, she said. He came through Kyoto. My ancestor met him, the records say. A young man, very serious. He explained what he was doing and he did not ask for help, but my ancestor helped anyway. What did he say when she helped? According to the records, thank you. And then he left, and 6 months later the family felt the sealing event through the ground, and they knew. She looked at him across the teacups. You are very serious too. I have been told that. Are you going to the other hubs? Yes. Hub 6 is occupied. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. If there is anything under Kyoto that would be useful to you, you have access to it. She said it simply, without ceremony, and he understood that the simplicity was the Kyoto tradition expressing itself, directness in the moment of genuine offer, formality only when ambiguity required it. Thank you, he said. She refilled his tea. Chapter 28, The Seal in the North. Hub 3. The invaders had known Hub 3 would be difficult to reach. Their survey documentation in the Hub 2 library confirmed it. The coastal shelf location, the depth, the tidal pressure pattern that made dimensional access inconsistent, and the particular character of Hub 3's native architecture, which was older than any of the other 7 hubs in the network and had accumulated what the invaders' records described as passive resistance accretion. The buildup of dimensional immune function that long undisturbed structures developed over time. The invaders had elected not to attempt Hub 3's conversion. Instead, they had placed a seal on it from outside, a suppression layer designed to hold the hub's broadcasting capacity below the detection threshold, effectively removing it from the active network while leaving the structure itself intact. The seal had held for 600 years. The problem with the seal, from the current perspective, was that it was not unintelligent. The Hub 2 library described the seal as an autonomous maintenance system, a construct designed to monitor itself and repair any degradation without requiring invader intervention. It had been doing exactly that for 6 centuries. By now it was, according to Drake's analysis of the signal data, significantly more sophisticated than when it had been placed, having adapted to environmental changes and developed secondary reinforcement mechanisms that the original design had not included. Breaking it would not be simple, and the location added a physical dimension that none of the previous operations had required. 80 meters below sea level, Kaneko said, the morning of the team briefing, looking at the map with the particular expression she reserved for problems that had no elegant solution. The hub itself is at 80 meters. The surface access point is at 30 meters, through a coastal shelf opening that is navigable on foot during the 6-hour low tide window. Issei had spent most of the previous week building the approach plan, and it had consumed more of his working capacity than any previous operation. We surface approach the shelf, enter through the low tide opening, descend on a line to the sub-shelf passage, traverse 300 meters to the hub access point, break the seal, enter, and complete the hub protocol. In 6 hours, Kiba said. In 5. We need margin. What is the seal breaking procedure? Akeno asked. It is the only part of this operation I am not fully satisfied with. The seal is an autonomous system. Attacking it directly will trigger the maintenance function and accelerate self-repair faster than we can damage it. He pulled up the analysis page. We need to introduce a pattern it cannot adapt to. Something that the maintenance function has no template for. Silence. Then Asia raised her hand, a gesture she had mostly stopped using in operational briefings over the past several months, which meant the impulse behind it was strong enough to override the habit. Can Keeper help? Issei had thought about this. Keeper is a network immune function. The seal is invader installed. She should be able to interface with it. But, Rias said, reading his pause, But she has not operated externally before. She has operated inside me, inside the hub environments, where the dimensional conditions are supportive. The open coastal environment at depth is different. He looked at the briefing notes. I want to ask her rather than assume. He closed his eyes briefly. The response came in its characteristic non-word pattern, possible, with qualification. The coastal depth environment would reduce her operational efficiency below what she could sustain inside a hub. But the seal was invader-built, and she was, at a structural level, the thing the invaders had been least able to handle. She would try. She will attempt it, Issei said. The efficiency question means we use her as the entry vector, and then proceed manually. She can break the seal's initial resistance. The maintenance function repair cycle is what we have to outpace. So she opens it, and we go through before it closes, Kaneko said. Essentially. That is a very short window to get 6 people through a dimensional seal. I know. He looked around the table. It is the best option available. The alternative is 6 to 8 hours of systematic disassembly from outside, which exceeds the low tide window and requires continuous exposure and the sub-shelf passage. No one preferred the alternative. Thursday, he said. Low tide is at 0340. We enter the coastal shelf at 0300. The northern Aomori coast at 0245 was cold in a way that was not merely atmospheric. The dimensional pressure of the hub 300 meters out under the water made the air along the cliff path feel compressed, like standing at the edge of something that was larger than the visible space suggested. The low tide window had opened at 0318, 7 minutes later than projected due to a minor tidal variation, and Issei had spent those 7 minutes standing on the shelf with the peerage behind him and the dark water pulling back around his feet and running the approach geometry one final time. The shelf opening was visible, a dark gap in the rock face, roughly 2 meters by 1.5, below the high tide line and currently exposed. Cold salt smell and the sound of water moving through the passage behind the rock. Kage goes first, Issei said. Full shadow scout. The relay comes back to me in real time. We hold here until I have the descent passage clear. Kage moved into the opening and disappeared. The relay came back in 30 seconds, passage clear, no blockages, descent line anchor point identifiable at the 40-meter mark, sub-shelf opening accessible beyond. Move, Issei said. The descent was the worst physical element of any operation they had conducted. The passage was navigable but not comfortable, cold water at knee depth, uneven footing on the shelf rock, the ceiling dropping at the 40-meter mark to a crawl height for 3 body lengths before opening again. Asia managed it without complaint, which confirmed that Asia's physical capacity had increased significantly over the past 6 months of operational activity. Kaneko moved through the crawl section with efficiency that made it look architectural. Kiba was immediately behind Issei and kept pace without effort. Akeno caught her shoulder on the crawl section ceiling, a minor impact, and said nothing, and moved on. The sub-shelf passage opened at the 300-meter mark into a chamber that the tide had never reached. Dry rock, old air with the particular stillness of a space that had not been disturbed in a very long time, and directly ahead, visible through the system overlay as a dense overlay of constrained dimensional energy, the seal. It was not invisible. It was not material. It occupied the space in front of the hub access point the way a wall occupies space, without color or texture but with absolute physical reality. The maintenance function was audible at this proximity, a low, recursive hum with a self-correcting pattern in it, like a living lock turning its own tumblers. Keeper, Issei said. The presence in his arm shifted to the forward orientation he had come to associate with her external operations. Different from the resting state. More alert. And faintly, something like what resolve might be in a non-human awareness. When you are ready, he said. The seal resisted for 4 seconds. Then Keeper engaged. The hum changed pitch, 3 times in rapid succession, and then it broke. Not shattered, not explosive. It broke the way a lock breaks when the right key turns it, with a sound that was more conceptual than physical, a resolution of held tension, and in the space where the seal had been, the hub access point opened. Go, Issei said. The maintenance function had a 3-second response cycle. They had 2.5. They went through in order, Kiba, Kaneko, Asia, Akeno, Rias, Issei. The last step through as the maintenance functions repair cycle began to reconstruct the seal around the opening, and he cleared the threshold with the seal edge brushing the back of his jacket as it sealed shut behind him. Hub 3's interior was dark by standard perception and alive by system overlay. 600 years of isolation had not damaged it. The passive resistance accretion the invaders' records had described was visible as a secondary layer over every surface, the dimensional immune function that Hub 3 had been building for centuries in the absence of external maintenance, and it recognized the Sovereign's presence the moment Issei stepped fully inside. The dark lifted. Not through any light source. Through the surfaces themselves becoming permeable to perception, and the chamber becoming comprehensible where it had been opaque. Hub 3 was intact, undamaged, and very, very old, and it had been waiting in silence for a very long time. The Hub protocol took 42 minutes. There was no library equivalent to Hub 2, no invader documentation, no architectural blueprint overlapping with Hub 1's inheritance. What Hub 3 contained was simpler, and in some ways more significant, a full operational baseline record of the Hub network as it had existed before the invasion. What the network had been designed for, in complete detail, before anything went wrong. Issei transferred the index during the protocol and read the first 3 entries with the disciplined speed that reading under operational pressure had trained in him over the past months. The network had been built as a dimensional stability architecture, a global system for regulating the pressure differential between the material plane and the dimensional spaces adjacent to it. Not a military system. Not a weapon system. A maintenance system, analogous to what Keeper was at the individual hub level, operating at planetary scale. The invaders had not been attacking a military installation. They had been attempting to take over a planetary maintenance system. He sat with this for a moment in the quiet of Hub 3's intact chamber while Asia completed the final seal verification and Kaneko checked the perimeter, and the others waited. "Drake," he said quietly. "The implications are significant," Drake said, equally quiet. A dimensional stability architecture operating at that scale, if it were compromised, would not simply affect the Hub network. It would affect every dimensional space connected to the material plane, the Underworld, Heaven, Purgatory. Every adjacent space with a material plane connection. A pause. The invaders were not simply invading. They were attempting to acquire control of the environmental conditions for every plane in range. And they still have Hub 6. Yes. Issei stood and turned to the peerage. Complete the protocol and seal. I will brief fully when we are surface side. He looked at Rias. The scope of this is larger than previously understood. She read his expression the way she had learned to over months of working together, the slight change in the set of his jaw that meant he had processed something and was filing it for proper presentation when conditions permitted. Understood, she said. They sealed. They ascended through the sub-shelf passage with the tide beginning to return at their backs, the cold water rising from ankle to calf to knee on the exit, and emerged onto the coastal shelf into the pre-dawn sky with the east beginning to pale over the sea. Issei stood on the shelf and looked at the water above where Hub 3 lay in its centuries of silence, and thought about a planetary maintenance system and 6 hubs still damaged, and 1 hub occupied by people who had understood what they were trying to take. Then he said, back to the vehicle. We brief on the road. Chapter 29, the scope of it. What the network was built for. He briefed in a rest stop parking lot north of Morioka, with the vehicle's engine off and the first light coming over the mountains to the east. He did not simplify it. The peerage had earned the unfiltered version over months of working beside him, and in any case simplification would have distorted the meaning. He laid out the Hub 3 baseline record in full, the network's design function, the scale of that function, the implication of invader control of Hub 6 in the context of what the network was actually for. When he finished, the parking lot was quiet for a long time. Kiba spoke first. The pillar assembly. Do they know what the network is? I do not believe so. The prior sovereign's inheritance data did not include the network's design function. He knew the hubs existed and what they could do operationally, but Hub 3's baseline record appears to have been inaccessible to him. The invader seal was placed before he attempted access, so no one in the current power structure knows, Akeno said. Serorg may understand the strategic significance better than most, given what I shared with him about the prior sovereign's sealing operation. But the full design function, the planetary scale of it, no. That information was in Hub 3, which means we are currently the only people who know what Hub 6 represents, Rias said. Yes. She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture he had come to recognize as her most serious thinking posture. You will need to decide who to tell. I have already decided. Serorg, immediately, before we proceed further. The pillar assembly requires careful consideration. The information has political weight that could destabilize the current structure if handled incorrectly. He paused. There is also a category of entity that should be informed that is not devil. Heaven, Kiba said quietly. The network operates across all connected planes. If it functions correctly, every plane benefits. If it is controlled by the invaders, every plane is at risk. He looked at Rias. I do not have the diplomatic channels for heaven. You do. She absorbed this. You want me to reach out to the Seraphim, to someone who can carry the information to them with appropriate framing. This cannot go through a formal channel that gets logged and distributed before we have Hub 6 resolved. It needs to go through someone with enough standing to be heard and enough discretion to wait. Rias was quiet for a moment. Issei Hyoudou, she said. She is in the region. And she is more subtle than her manner suggests. That is your call to make. I trust your assessment, Akeno said in a tone that was careful and specifically not light. You are asking Rias to trust your assessment of her assessment. I am asking Rias to make the decision within her area of knowledge. That is not the same thing. A small pause. And then Akeno smiled briefly, and it was genuine. No. It is not. Kaneko, who had been looking out the vehicle window, said, When do we tell Serorg? Today. I will call from the road. He started the engine. 4 hours back to Ko. I will have the call framework ready before we arrive. The call with Serorg lasted 45 minutes. Issei had learned, over the course of their working relationship, that Serorg's processing time for difficult information tracked with the information's political weight rather than its complexity. Complex tactical problems he absorbed quickly. Politically significant revelations he sat with in silence for longer, not because he was slow but because he was thorough. The Hub 3 revelation required 32 seconds of silence after the initial presentation. Then Serorg said, The invaders were trying to control the dimensional environmental system for every connected plane. Yes. And they still have a foothold in Hub 6. Yes. Another pause. The pillar assembly will want to know. Eventually. I want Hub 6 resolved before the information reaches the full assembly. A strategic asset of this significance becomes a political contest the moment it enters formal channels, and a political contest introduces timelines I cannot control. He kept his voice even. I am sharing this with you because you are already committed to Hub 6 and because your judgment on the political dimension is better than mine. You want me to manage the assembly communication. I want your assessment of when that communication should happen and in what form. The decision is yours. A long pause. Issei waited. After Hub 6, Serorg said. Present the complete picture, including the resolution, rather than the threat without the answer. The assembly responds better to problems they are being told have been solved than to problems they are being asked to solve. Agreed. Force composition for Hub 6. I have been thinking about this since our last call. I want to bring 2 of my people in addition to myself. Former Bayo retainers, both combat-rated, both capable of operating in dimensional environments. Names and operational profiles when available. Before the end of the week. Understood. A pause. Serorg. The prior sovereign sealed Hub 6 from the inside. I know. That is not going to be our outcome. Another pause. How? Keeper can interface with invader systems in a way the prior sovereign had no equivalent of. He was operating without her. We are not. Issei kept his voice level. The path through Hub 6 is different from his path. I intend to clear it, not seal it. Serorg was quiet for 4 seconds. Then we clear it. Yes. I will have the profiles before Friday. The call ended. Issei set the phone down and looked at the road ahead. That was good, Drake said. It was necessary. Those are not mutually exclusive. Issei did not respond to that, but he noted it. The Hub 4 problem waited. He had not scheduled it. It was on the board in the East study, outlined in red with its single-line notation beneath it, and it sat there across every operational planning session and briefing and preparation cycle like a piece of unfinished grammar. Do not enter alone. He had read everything the inheritance data contained about Hub 4, which was limited. The prior sovereign had visited once, had survived, had left that notation and nothing else. The Hub 2 library contained an invader survey reference to Hub 4 that described it as inaccessible via standard conversion protocol without further explanation. Hub 3's baseline record included Hub 4 in the network schematic but flagged its access parameters as requiring sovereign class authorization at minimum 2-vector confirmation. 2-vector confirmation. He had been thinking about what that meant for 3 weeks. One night, at the East study desk, with the board behind him and the Hub schematic in front of him, he wrote the hypothesis down in the margin of his notebook. Hub 4 requires 2 sovereign class presences to open. The prior sovereign had only 1. Hence the notation. He survived but could not enter. And then, below that, what constitutes a sovereign class presence? And below that, the system. Drag, at current level. Keeper. Do any of them qualify as a second vector? He did not have an answer. He had a direction. He marked Hub 4 as 5th in the operational sequence, after Hub 5's submerged clearance and before Hub 6's occupied clearance, and he put a separate working file on the desk labeled Hub 4 Research and began adding to it every time a new piece of information suggested an angle. 3 weeks of operational planning, and the file had 14 entries. He kept adding. Chapter 30, Submerged. Hub 5. Hub 5 required a different approach vector than any previous operation. 40 kilometers offshore. Entirely submerged. Seafloor access through a volcanic shelf formation that the Hub 2 library identified as a natural dimensional transit point, one of several along the western coast that the invaders had documented in their survey. The transit point was not stable. The volcanic shelf shifted with tidal pressure, making the access window variable rather than predictable. The Hub 2 library's last recorded transit window was 200 years old. Issei had spent the full week after the Hub 3 operation building the approach plan for Hub 5, and the approach plan was the most contingent he had produced yet. More variables, more decision points, more dependencies on real-time conditions that could not be assessed from shore. He had also spent 3 days researching maritime dimensional transit methodology in the Underworld archive that Serorg had arranged access to, and the research had produced one useful finding. The volcanic shelf transit points were not structurally identical to the Hub access points but were compatible with Keeper's interface function. If Keeper could interface with the Hub seal, she could potentially interface with the transit point. He brought this to Keeper directly. Her response was more cautious than her Hub 3 response had been. The open water environment introduced more variables than the coastal shelf. The depth of the volcanic transit point, approximately 200 meters below the surface, exceeded what she had operated at before. She would try. She was not certain. Uncertain is not no, Issei said. The presence that was Keeper agreed that uncertain was not no. The operational solution for the depth issue was, in the end, not a dimensional one. It was a practical one. The Underworld archive had documented a pressure adaptation protocol used by Devil operatives in deep-sea dimensional environments. A temporary resistance field that operated at a scale small enough to be maintained by a single sufficiently powerful individual. Akeno had the sustained output capacity to maintain it for an extended duration. How extended, Akeno said, at the briefing. The Hub protocol takes between 30 and 60 minutes based on the previous 2 operations. I want margin. 2 hours. That is within my operational range. I know. I would not ask otherwise. She looked at him with an expression that contained something specific, a quality of recognition, and then she nodded and returned her attention to the briefing notes. They went by boat, a fishing vessel chartered without explanation from a harbor 43 kilometers south of Fukuoka, operated by a captain who had been doing unusual coastal work for the Gremory network for 11 years and understood that his job was to bring the boat to a location and hold it there and not ask questions about what happened after that. The sea was calm. The forecast had been accurate. Issei stood at the bow with the system overlay mapping the sea floor below and Kage running a shadow relay through the water column, an extension of shadow function that had required a week of incremental testing to confirm was possible at this depth. The volcanic shelf formation was visible in the overlay at 180 meters, a distinct ridge of high dimensional pressure against the geological baseline. The transit point was active. Not open, but active, pulsing with the same background rhythm he now recognized from the other hubs, a signal that the network had been maintaining across all 7 sites. It knows we are here, he said. Hub 5? Rias asked, standing beside him. All of them. The network is integrated. When we cleared Hub 1 and 2 and 3, the status updated across the network. Hub 5 has been aware of our approach since the Hub 3 operation. He watched the overlay. The transit point is showing cooperative behavior. The access window should stabilize when we are directly above it. They maneuvered the boat to position over the next 20 minutes, the captain working with the precision of someone who had spent years learning how to read Gremory network operational instructions without knowing what they meant. When the overlay showed the transit point directly below, Issei called the halt. Entry sequence, he said. Akeno, field at full pressure. I go first with Kage relay active. The field extends to everyone inside it at the moment of transit, so maintain proximity. Akeno brought up the resistance field, a sphere of compressed energy that adjusted itself to the dimensional pressure differential of the sea floor environment, and Issei felt the transition as a shift in perception rather than sensation, the water around him becoming transparent to system function rather than opaque to it. The transit to the sea floor was not instantaneous. It was a dimensional slide of approximately 4 seconds, during which the visual experience was of moving through progressively deeper light until the light of the surface was gone, and the light of the hub's own operational radiation replaced it, faint and blue-green and very old. Hub 5 opened around them. The invader conversion had been partial. The prior sovereign's records had noted this, and the Hub 2 library had confirmed it. The invaders had begun conversion work on Hub 5's outer ring and been interrupted, possibly by the events preceding the prior sovereign's sealing operation at Hub 6. The conversion remnants were visible in the outer ring as architectural intrusions, structures that did not belong to the Hub's original design and sat against its native geometry with the awkwardness of something inserted rather than grown. They were also dormant. 6 centuries of isolation at the bottom of the sea, and the conversion remnants had exhausted their operational charge. They were structures without function now, inert additions to a room that had otherwise maintained itself in the dark. Kiba, document the conversion remnant positions. I want a complete map before we proceed to the core. Issei moved forward into the hub's interior. Kaneko, structural sweep of the outer ring. I need to know if any of the remnants have compromised the native architecture. The work took 22 minutes. Kiba's documentation was precise and comprehensive. Kaneko's structural sweep found 2 points where conversion remnant anchoring had stressed the native wall, but neither had progressed to structural failure. Hub 5 was intact. The core protocol proceeded without incident. Hub 5's inheritance was operational, a maintenance log covering the hub's function from construction to the invader interference period, and within the maintenance log, a complete record of what the network had been doing between activations, the slow planetary scale work of pressure regulation that operated below any detection threshold the current power structures possessed. Issei read the maintenance log index with the particular focus that came from knowing what he was looking at now. The network had been active, continuously, even with 5 of its 7 hubs damaged or occupied. 3 hubs were enough to maintain baseline function. The system had been running at reduced capacity for 6 centuries, managing what it could with what remained. If all 7 hubs are operational, he said, quietly enough that only Drake heard, what does full capacity operation look like? Better than this, Drake said. The current dimensional pressure differential across the connected planes is within tolerance, but reduced capacity means tolerance is the ceiling, not the floor. Full capacity would mean actual stability margin, which means the planes have been operating at the edge of stability for 600 years and no one has known, gradually, slowly, the kind of degradation that looks like natural variation until you have the baseline to compare it to. Issei transferred the maintenance log and sealed the hub. The return transit was the same 4-second slide in reverse, and they emerged onto the boat with the afternoon sun lower than when they had gone in, and the captain brought the boat around without being asked and set course for the harbor. Issei stood at the stern and looked at the water above where Hub 5 sat in its partial conversion and centuries of quiet maintenance work, and then he turned and went to write the approach plan for Hub 4. Chapter 31 2 Vector. The Mountain Problem. The Hub 4 research file had 31 entries. Issei read through it on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the Hub 5 operation, with the mountain range approach plan spread across the East study desk and the Underworld archive open to the section on sovereign class designations and their operational implications. He had been building toward a conclusion and had not stated it yet, because stating it required being confident in it, and confidence required evidence, and the evidence was almost complete. Entry 29, Hub 3 baseline record uses the phrase sovereign class authorization without specifying individual versus combined. The phrase is singular in form, but the qualifier minimum 2 vector is additive, suggesting the 2 vectors do not need to originate from the same individual. Entry 30, Keeper's network immune function is documented in the Hub 2 library as sovereign adjacent in its access classification. The invaders classified it at that level specifically because it could open invader seals, which required sovereign class override. Entry 31, the final entry, written this morning. If the 2-vector requirement is 1 sovereign class designation plus 1 sovereign adjacent function, then the combination of the system-granted sovereign designation and Keeper's sovereign adjacent classification may satisfy the entry condition. The prior sovereign did not have Keeper. He could not satisfy the second vector. Hence, do not enter alone. He closed the file. Drake. I have been following the research, Drake said. The logic holds. It is still a hypothesis. Everything we have done that has worked began as a hypothesis. The difference between this and previous ones is that you have more evidence for this one than for most. Issei looked at the mountain range map. Hub 4 was in the central range, accessible by a trail that became a scramble above the tree line and then a technical climb for the final 400 meters. The hub access point was inside a shelf formation at the base of a north-facing rock face, partially concealed by geological overhang. The prior sovereign had climbed to it, tried to enter, could not, and descended. And had taken the time to write a note for whoever came next. He found something about that significant. We go Saturday, he said. I want a smaller team for the approach. The technical section above Treeline is not appropriate for a full peerage deployment. Kaneko and Kiba, Drake said. Obviously. And Asia. In case the hypothesis is wrong, and what waits inside Hub 4 requires medical support. He stood from the desk. Rias and Akeno hold perimeter at Treeline. Close enough for relay, far enough to respond if the situation inside exceeds our capacity. You are building in failure modes. I always build in failure modes. More than usual, Drake said. Issei did not respond to that. He folded the mountain map and put it on top of the research file. Do not enter alone, he said. You will not be alone. No, he said. I will not. They reached the tree line at 11:42 on Saturday with the mountain bright and cold above them and the north-facing rock face visible at the top of the scramble section as a dark overhang against the blue. Rias stopped at the tree-line marker they had identified from the map, the point where the trail became technically demanding and their perimeter function was best served by holding, and she stood there in the morning light and looked at Issei for a moment before he turned to go up. She did not say anything particular. She did not need to. The look was the content. He turned and started up the scramble. The technical section above the scramble required 2 hours. Not because they were slow but because the rock above Treeline was in its late autumn condition, which meant frost in the shaded sections and loose surface in the exposed sections and a consistent requirement for deliberate movement rather than speed. Kaneko moved across rock the way she moved through everything, with a settled efficiency that wasted nothing. Kiba was precise and quiet. Asia was carefully focused, and Issei stayed one position behind her on the technical sections in case she needed assistance, which she did not. The shelf formation at the base of the north-facing rock face was deeper than it appeared from below. 10 meters of overhang, and within the overhang, The hub access point was exactly where the Hub 3 schematic had placed it, a section of rock face that was not rock, that carried the same dimensional density signature as every other hub access point they had found, but sealed here not by a lock or a seal but by something that read as a requirement rather than a barrier. It was waiting for something specific. Keeper, Issei said. The forward orientation shift. Alert, and something that was the equivalent of ready. He placed his right hand on the access point surface. The system designation registered, Sovereign Class. He placed his left hand beside it. Keeper's presence extended through his palm into the surface. The access point opened. Not explosively, not with ceremony. It opened the way a door opens when the right key is in it, and the handle is turned, with a mechanical completeness that was entirely without drama. The rock face became permeable, and beyond it, Hub 4's interior was waiting. Issei exhaled once. The hypothesis was correct, Drake said. Yes, Issei said, and went in. Hub 4 was the oldest structure he had encountered. Not the largest, not the most architecturally complex, but the oldest, the kind of age that was not visible in any specific feature but that pervaded the environment the way the smell of old wood pervades a very old house. The dimensional material of Hub 4's interior had been in place long enough to settle, to become genuinely continuous with its environment rather than imposed upon it, and the result was a hub that felt less like a built structure and more like a geological formation that happened to contain highly sophisticated engineering. The prior sovereign's notation had implied danger. Issei had prepared for active threat. What he found was a guardian. It appeared at the second ring boundary, and it was not an entity in any sense he had previously encountered. Not an apex creature like the Nexus Authority in Hub 1. Not a pattern presence like the Gate Speaker. Not an invader construct. It was the Hub's own maintenance function, made manifest in a form that could interface with a visitor, and it was very old, and it had been in continuous operation for longer than any human civilization currently in existence. It communicated in the same non-word pattern as Keeper, but more precisely, having had more time to develop the translation function. It said, "You carry the second vector." Yes, Issei said. It said, "The prior visitor could not." He was not wrong to try. He was not ready. He left a note, Issei said. For whoever came after. A pause. And then something that was, in its translated form, the equivalent of yes. He understood what the hub required. He hoped someone would come. Issei looked at the guardian and thought about the prior sovereign, who had climbed this mountain alone, who had tried the door and found it locked, who had written 4 words for a successor he would never meet and then gone to do what he could without this one. He did enough, Issei said. We are here because of what he built. The guardian was still for a long moment. Then it moved aside. Hub 4's core contained something neither Drake nor Issei had anticipated. The other hubs had each contained a different type of inheritance: architectural data, historical records, invader documentation, operational baselines. Hub 4 contained the network's original commissioning record, the documentation produced at the moment of the system's initial activation, which included 2 things of specific significance. First, the identity of the builders. The network had not been built by any entity currently represented in the known power structures. It predated the current devil hierarchies, the angelic organizational structures, the Yukai territorial systems. It had been built by a civilization the commissioning record referred to simply as the first architects, who had designed the network as a response to a dimensional stability crisis they had observed developing across the connected planes, and who had anticipated that the network would need to operate independently of any particular power structure because power structures changed and the dimensional stability requirement did not. They had also anticipated that the network would eventually require a sovereign to maintain it, and had built the sovereign designation into the system architecture as a contingency activation, a function that would awaken when the network's status deteriorated below a specific threshold. The system had not appeared spontaneously when Issei died in the ring. The system had activated because the network needed it to. Second, the full operational parameters for Hub 7. Hub 7 was not lost. It was not in the East China Sea. The coordinate corruption in the prior sovereign's records was not an error. Hub 7 was accessed through Hub 4, using the 2-vector authorization, through a secondary transit that the commissioning record described as the network's emergency protocol, a direct hub-to-hub connection established specifically for situations where normal access was compromised. Hub 7 was the network's backup core, and the transit to it opened from Hub 4's inner chamber. Issei stood in front of the secondary transit and looked at it for a long time. This was not on the schedule, he said. No, Drake agreed. Hub 7 is accessible now. We have the authorization. We do, but we do not know what is in there. No. We know it is the backup core and it is accessed through an emergency protocol. Both of those facts suggest it should be approached carefully. Issei looked at the transit. Then he turned away from it. We seal Hub 4 and plan Hub 7 properly, he said. Not today. Agreed, Drake said, and there was something in the dragon's voice that might have been relief, or approval, or both. Kaneko, who had been standing at the second ring boundary for the duration, said good. Asia let out a breath that had been held for a while. Kiba simply nodded. Issei sealed the hub and led them back out into the mountain air, where the north-facing rock face caught the afternoon light and the treeline was visible far below, and somewhere down there, Rias and Akeno were waiting. Chapter 32, The Origin of the System. What the commissioning record revealed. The descent took longer than the ascent because the light was going. They reached treeline at 1731, with the sky orange and the shadows long across the trail, and Rias was exactly where they had left her, standing at the treeline marker with Akeno beside her and the particular quality of patience that was not passive but active, the kind that came from choosing to wait rather than being unable to move. She looked at him when he came through the treeline and her expression asked the question before she did. It opened, he said. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Good. There is more. The briefing will take time. Not here. She read his tone and did not press further. They made the trailhead by 1902 and sat in the parked vehicles with the heat running while Issei laid out the commissioning record content in full. He watched each piece land on the people in the vehicle with him, watched the processing move through their faces, and when he reached the final piece, the system activation, the room went very quiet. Akeno said the system woke up because the network needed it to. That is what the commissioning record states. Which means your death in the rain was not random. The activation of the system was not random, he said carefully. The events that preceded the activation are a separate question. I do not have evidence that the specific circumstances were engineered. I have evidence that the system was designed to activate when a threshold was crossed and that it selected the nearest viable recipient. Viable by what standard, Kiba asked? The commissioning record does not specify selection criteria. I have a separate file on that question. He paused. It is the least complete file I have. Rias, from the front seat where she had been looking at the dark trail visible through the windshield, said, What does the system think? Issei looked at her. The system is a tool, not an entity. Drake is an entity. Drake is in the sacred gear. That is different. Is it? She turned to look at him. I am asking whether the system, in the process of becoming what it has become in you, has developed any capacity for self-reference. For knowing what it is. He considered this for a long time. I do not know, he said. That is an honest answer. She nodded. The vehicle was quiet for a moment, and then Asia said, Hub 7. Yes. How do you plan for something you have no data on? Carefully. He looked at the research notes on his lap. Hub 7 is the backup core. That means it contains, at minimum, a redundant copy of everything the other 6 hubs contain. It may contain the full original commissioning data in a form more complete than what Hub 4 provided. It may also contain the emergency protocol documentation for network scenarios we have not yet encountered. He paused. It may also be the thing the invaders most wanted and could not reach. That last sentence went into the vehicle's air and stayed there. When, Kaneko said, after Hub 6. The sequence holds. Hub 6 first, because an occupied hub is an active threat to everything we have built. Hub 7 after through Hub 4, once the network is fully secured. He folded the notes. 2 operations. The final 2. And then the network is complete, Asia said. And then the maintenance work begins, Issei said. Completing the network is not an endpoint. It is the beginning of what it is supposed to do, He started the engine and pulled out of the trailhead onto the road back toward the nearest highway, and behind him in the vehicle, the peerage was quiet with the particular quality of quiet that came after something large had been understood. The Hub 4 commissioning record changed three things in the planning architecture. First, it confirmed that the invaders had known what the network was and had been attempting to acquire it deliberately, which meant Hub 6 was not simply a dimensional installation but a command and control node that the invaders had held specifically to prevent network restoration. They had not been there 6 centuries by accident. They had been there because they understood that the network could not be fully restored while they held the hub. Second, it confirmed that the first architect's design included a failsafe. If the network was fully restored and all 7 hubs were operational, the network would initiate a full system diagnostic that would, according to the commissioning record, actively eject any unauthorized presence from the hub architecture. A restored network, operating at full capacity, would resolve the Hub 6 occupation through its own function. This was significant. The invaders in Hub 6 would know this. Any invader who had been there long enough, who had studied the system they were occupying, would understand that the restoration of the remaining hubs was a threat to their position. The Hub 2 library confirmed they were competent. They had been in Hub 6 for 6 centuries. They had studied the system. They know we are coming, Issei said the morning after the mountain descent, at the East Study Board. He had added 3 new entries to the Hub 6 section overnight. The network status updates are accessible to any entity inside a hub. When we restored Hub 2, 3, and 5, the network logged the changes. Anyone monitoring from Hub 6 has been watching the restoration progress. Rias stood beside him at the board. They have been watching us work. They know we have 4 hubs restored. They know Hub 4 and 6 remain. If they have read the commissioning record, which they have had 6 centuries to find, they know that 4 restored hubs initiates the diagnostic threshold, and that full restoration initiates the ejection protocol. Then they are not waiting passively. No. They have been preparing since we cleared Hub 2 at minimum. Possibly since Hub 1. He looked at the board. The garrison size in the prior sovereign's records, 40 to 80 entities. That figure is from before the prior sovereign's sealing operation. In the 2 to 4 centuries since, they have had uninterrupted access to Hub 6. They may have rebuilt significantly. You think there are more of them now. I think the prior figure is a floor, not a ceiling. And I think they are not going to wait for us to approach them. He turned from the board. I think they are going to move first. Rias absorbed this. How long? I do not know. But Hub 4's restoration, when we complete the protocol and it logs to the network, will trigger whatever response they have prepared. We need to be ready for that trigger before we complete Hub 4's protocol. But Hub 4 is already open and accessed. The protocol is not complete. The full network log update does not transmit until the protocol sealing sequence. He looked at her. We have a window. I want to use it. She nodded slowly. You want to complete Hub 4's protocol at the same time as the Hub 6 operation. Coordinated. Yes. The ejection protocol activates at full restoration. If we can synchronize Hub 4's completion with Hub 6 clearance, the ejection sequence activates, while we are already inside Hub 6. He kept his voice level. That is the third thing the commissioning record changed. The attack plan? She was quiet for a long moment. That is a very narrow timing window, she said. I know. If it goes wrong at either end, both operations fail. I know. She looked at the board. When do you want to bring Serorg into this? Today. Chapter 33, The Preparation. 30 days out. Serorg arrived in Ko 3 days after the call. He came with the 2 former Baal retainers he had mentioned, a woman named Keiru who had served with the Baal Combat Division for 16 years and was rated in the top 12% of Underworld active fighters, and a man named Rin who had been in the Baal Dimensional Operations Unit for 11 years and whose specific expertise was in invader-adjacent threat assessment. A specialization Issei had not known existed until he read the operational profile. Rin had been in the Dimensional Operations Unit during a previous invader contact event, 20 years ago, a small incursion through a non-hub transit point that the Underworld military had contained and closed. He was one of the few people currently operating who had direct combat experience against invader-class entities. Issei spent 2 hours with Rin in the East study on the afternoon of their arrival, and the briefing was the most productive 2 hours of Hub 6 preparation yet. They have a command hierarchy, Rin said, looking at the Hub 6 section of the whiteboard. In the incursion we contained, they operated with a clear command structure: commander, tactical officers, rank and file. Disrupting the command function collapses their formation response time significantly. How long does it take to collapse? In our event, 4 minutes from commander removal to formation breakdown. But our event had a small force. Hub 6 has had 6 centuries to adapt. I would not assume the same timeline, but the structural principle holds. Remove the command tier, and the response degrades. That has been consistent across every documented invader contact event I have access to. Ren pointed to the force composition estimate on the board. 40 to 80 at the prior sovereign's era. If they have rebuilt since, the command tier has likely expanded proportionally. You may be looking at multiple commanders rather than one, which changes the targeting priority structure. Yes. Single target command removal is cleanest. Multiple simultaneous removals require more coordination and more force split. Issei looked at the board and added a notation: multiple command targets assumed. Plan for simultaneous removal. What is their engagement preference? He asked. Distance first, then close. They have ranged projection capability that is stronger than their melee function. In the incursion event, drawing them into close engagement significantly reduced their output. Ren paused. But close engagement in a hub environment means we are fighting inside the structure they have had 6 centuries to modify. They will know every corner. The ejection protocol changes that, Issei said. If the synchronized completion works, the ejection sequence activates inside Hub 6 while we are engaged. The network itself becomes a force multiplier. Ren looked at him. The network is going to push them out from inside, from every surface simultaneously. Based on the commissioning record's ejection protocol description, it is a total environment response, not a targeted one. It removes unauthorized presence from the entire hub architecture at once. And we are authorized. We are. He looked at the board. The question is what happens to unauthorized presences that are physically inside the hub when the ejection occurs. The record is ambiguous on whether it is a displacement, or something more terminal. Ren was quiet for a moment. That ambiguity matters. Yes. I do not want to plan around a specific outcome I cannot confirm. The ejection protocol is a support element. The primary plan is clearance by our own capacity, with the ejection as an accelerant. Ren nodded. Agreed. You plan for what you know. You use what you get. He looked at Ren with the particular attention he reserved for people whose operational thinking matched his own. How long did the Dimensional Operations Unit's preparation take for the incursion event? He asked. 8 weeks. But we had less information than you do and no internal access to the target structure. We have 4 weeks, Issei said. We will need to use them well. Then we start now, Ren said, and pulled his chair closer to the board. The 4 weeks were the most intensive preparation period of the project. Serorg and Kaoru ran combined training with the Gremory Peerage, a deliberate integration process designed to build the operational familiarity that made the difference between 6 people who could each do their function and 6 people who could do their function, while the person beside them did theirs simultaneously without interference or redundancy. Kiba and Kaoru had a natural complementarity in close-range approach that Issei documented in the battle plan as a paired element. Kaneko and Serorg's combined physical output at the heavy engagement end was substantial enough that Issei built a separate tactical role for them. Hub structural anchor, the force that would hold position in the event of the invaders' formation push and ensure the perimeter team could work without retreat pressure. Ren built the intelligence picture. He had methods for reading invader dimensional signatures through the gate speaker relay that Issei had not known existed. Refinements of techniques the Dimensional Operations Unit had developed in the 20 years since their incursion event, and he applied them systematically to the Hub 6 signal data that the gate speaker had been providing. By the end of the first week, the garrison estimate had been updated. Not 40 to 80, 90 to 120, with a command tier of at least 4. Issei adjusted the plan. The synchronized Hub 4 completion required someone to remain at Hub 4's inner chamber and trigger the sealing sequence at exactly the coordinated time. That someone had to be capable of operating alone at a hub that required 2-vector authorization to open. The 2-vector authorization was the combination of the system designation and keeper. Issei was the only current holder of both, which created a split operation problem. Issei needed to be in Hub 6 for the engagement, and Issei needed to be in Hub 4 for the sealing trigger. He spent 2 days on this problem before Drake said, the Hub 4 sealing sequence. Can Keeper initiate it independently? He had not considered this. He asked Keeper directly. The response was careful and detailed, which was unusual. She could initiate the sealing sequence. She had the access classification. What she could not do was maintain her own presence at the hub entrance if her host was in Hub 6. She was not separable. She operated through him, not independently of him. What if someone else is at Hub 4, he said to the air. With Hub 4 already open. Can Keeper signal through them as a relay? A long pause. The most careful consideration she had ever shown, a quality of thought that translated even through the non-word medium. Yes. If the person at Hub 4 was someone she had established an interface with, the interface could relay the sealing trigger if she initiated it from Hub 6 through the relay. Who do you have an interface with? He asked. The answer came with something like affection in it. Everyone on the team. She had been integrating with all of them for months through the Sovereign's Grace function. Issei sat with this for a long time. Then he went to find Asia. Asia listened to the full explanation sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "She can work through me." Yes. She believes so. She has been working through all of you indirectly through the Grace function. A direct relay is more intentional, but the foundation is already there. I would be at Hub 4 alone. You would be at Hub 4 with the Hub Guardian, which is a distinct presence. And with Keeper operating through you at the critical moment. He kept his voice level. It is a role that requires precision and timing. Not combat capacity. I know what my role in combat is, she said, without defensiveness. It was simply a statement. This is different. This is something I can do that no one else can. Yes. She looked at the tea. Keeper trusts me with this. She indicated so. A pause. Do you? He looked at her. I designed the plan around your capacity. That is my answer. She picked up the tea, found it cold, set it back down. Then yes, she said. I will do it. He nodded. Practice session with Keeper tomorrow morning, he said. I want the relay confirmed before we commit to the plan. What time? 0700. I will be up, she said. The relay practice was 3 sessions over 5 days. First session, Issei in the East study, Asia in the living room, Keeper's relay function tested at conversational room distance. The relay produced the sensation Asia described as warmth in the left forearm, same location as the integration point in Issei, and a clarity of directional sense, a knowledge of what Keeper was indicating without words. Second session, Issei in the house, Asia in the garden, 60 meters of separation. Relay maintained. The directional clarity reduced slightly but remained functional. Third session, Issei at Hub 2's access entrance in Kyoto, Asia holding position at the Ko house, 400 kilometers of separation. Relay maintained at reduced resolution. The sealing sequence trigger, which Keeper rehearsed 3 times, transmitted clearly on all 3 attempts. After the third session, Asia called him on the phone and said, "It worked." Yes. She is very precise, Asia said. Keeper. When she works through the relay, there is a precision to it that is different from how she feels normally. Different how? Like she is paying full attention. Not divided. Just completely focused on what she is doing. He thought about what it meant to be a network immune function performing a precision operation after 700 years of careful travel, and the prior 6 months of working with a team that had learned to trust her. Yes, he said. That sounds right. He hung up and added to the plan, Asia/Hub 4 relay confirmed. Keeper integration tested at operational distance. Proceed. Chapter 34, The Eve of Hub 6. The night before the final operation. The final briefing was at 1900 on the evening before the Hub 6 operation. All 11 people, the full Gremory peerage, Serorg, Kaoru, and Rin. The East study was at capacity. People sitting on the desk and the windowsill and the floor with the whiteboard behind Issei showing the complete Hub 6 operational plan in its final form. 16 pages condensed to a schematic that required knowing the 16 pages to read fully. He walked through it once, the complete sequence, without simplification. Asia departs for Hub 4 at 0430. Keeper relay established at 0445. Asia enters Hub 4 at 0500. Guardian confirms. Inner chamber position established by 0530. Hub 6 approach team departs Co at 0445. Arrives at the offshore charter position at 0600. Transit to Hub 6 surface access begins at 0630. The Hub 6 surface installation, which Ren's intelligence had located as a dimensional field projection originating from a coastal point formation in the Okinawa Shelf, is the first engagement target. Ren and Kaoru handle the surface installation. The field drops. Hub 6 access opens. Entry team, Issei, Serorg, Kiba, Kaneko, Akeno, Rias. 6 people against a garrison of 90 to 120, with a command tier of at minimum 4. Primary objective, command tier removal. Secondary objective, formation disruption. Tertiary objective, hold position until ejection protocol activates. The ejection protocol activates when Asia triggers Hub 4's sealing sequence from the inner chamber, which completes the network restoration. Coordinated timing, when Issei signals through Keeper's relay to Asia, she triggers. Signal time, when the primary and secondary objectives are complete, and the force is in a defensible position. Margin for error in the timing sequence, 4 minutes based on Ren's formation collapse timeline estimate. Issei had planned for 2. He closed the briefing and looked around the room. Questions. 7 questions, from 7 people, each one precise and relevant. He answered each one completely. Then he said sleep. We depart at the times listed. Any preparation that is not complete at this point will not be completed by morning. People began to move. Serorg stopped beside him on the way out and said quietly, "You built a good plan." "I built the best plan the available information supports." "That is the same thing," Serorg said. In the field. He left, and then it was just Issei and Rias in the East study, and she was looking at the whiteboard with the particular stillness she had on the rare occasions when she was fully at rest. "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes." She turned and looked at him. "The prior sovereign sealed Hub 6 and did not come back." "I know. You have a different path." "We have a different path," he said. "Keeper. The relay. The ejection protocol. The network functioning in our favor instead of only in the invader's understanding." She looked at him for a moment. "Come back," she said. "Not as a request. As a statement of what was required." "Yes," he said. She went to sleep. He sat at the East study desk for another hour and read the plan one final time, not to find gaps. There were no gaps left. But because this was how he prepared, the final read, the moment when the plan became fully his and not a set of contingencies but a single coherent thing he would carry into the operation and execute. Then he closed the notebook and went to sleep. Chapter 35 Hub 6. The Occupied Hub. Asia reached Hub 4 at 0503. The mountain was cold and the trail was familiar, and the hub opened for her with Keeper's presence present in her left forearm, and the Guardian's attention immediately active at the threshold. She told the Guardian what she was here to do, and the Guardian moved aside without hesitation, and she established her position in the inner chamber at 0527, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. She did not find the waiting difficult. She had known it would be waiting, and she had prepared for it the way she prepared for all operational requirements, by deciding before she arrived that she would be ready when the moment came and that the time until the moment was not a burden but a part of what she had been given to do. Keeper's presence in her arm was calm. She found that steadying. "When he signals," she said quietly, in the old chamber, "I will be ready." Keeper agreed. The surface installation went down in 8 minutes. Ren had built the disassembly approach over 2 weeks of analysis, and Kaoru executed it with a precision that Issei had watched from the boat and noted was as clean as anything the Gremory peerage had managed at their best. The field projection terminated, and in the water below them, Hub 6 opened. Entry team into the water. The transit to Hub 6 was longer than Hub 5's, 12 seconds of dimensional slide, deeper and with more resistance, the resistance of a system that had been maintained under invader authority for 6 centuries and recognized the sovereign designation as something to push back against rather than facilitate. Keeper absorbed the pushback and held the transit open. They emerged into Hub 6 interior at 0714. The first thing Issei registered was the scale. Hub 6 was the largest of the 7 hubs by a significant margin, larger even than Hub 1. The invaders had modified it extensively. The native hub architecture was still present but overlaid with their own structural additions, the 6th century project of making a permanent installation out of something that had not been designed to be one. The result was a hub that felt inhabited rather than designed, the way a long-occupied territory looks different from a constructed one. The second thing he registered was the garrison. They were waiting, not passively. Not in a formation designed for surprise engagement. In a formation designed for a specific enemy that they had been tracking through the network updates for months. They had anticipated a 6 to 9 person entry team, and they had arranged for a response that assumed exactly that. 94. Ren's updated estimate had been 90 to 120. 94 was within that range. Issei looked at the formation for exactly 2 seconds and then said, Serorg, left anchor. Kaneko with him. Kiba, right flank Keiru with you. Akeno, elevation suppression. Rias, formation coordination from midpoint. I am going to the command tier. Nobody asked how he knew where the command tier was. He had read Ren's intelligence picture for 4 weeks. He knew. The formation contact was not the controlled clearance of the previous hub operations. It was a fight. The invader entities were not like the apex creatures from the gate dungeons. They were more deliberate, more adaptive, capable of adjusting their engagement approach between engagements in a way that the gate creatures had not been. Ren's assessment of their range preference was accurate. Their first contact was a coordinated distance barrage that Akeno answered from elevation with the sustained output that she had developed over 6 months of escalating operational demands, and the barrage exchange bought the close engagement team the seconds they needed to reach contact distance. Serorg and Kaneko held the left anchor with a completeness that was impressive even by the standards of what Issei had watched over the past months. The invader formation pressure on the left went through 3 adjustment cycles and failed to move the anchor each time. Kaneko absorbed 2 direct hits that would have displaced any non-supernatural combatant, and continued operating. Kiba and Keiru on the right flank were exactly the paired element Issei had planned them as, Kiba's precision and Keiru's 16 years of high-output experience complementing each other with the naturalness that came from combat training together, and the right flank command position that the invader formation had placed the tactical officer at was cleared in the 4th minute of engagement. 1 of 4. Issei moved toward the primary command tier through the formation center, where the invaders had left a gap size for 6 to 9 opponents, and had not accounted for what 16 weeks of shadow extraction had built him. Kage ran point in the shadow dimension and the other generals ran interference on either side, and the Shadow Army drew engagement from the formation's midpoint, while Issei moved through the gap. Drake was calm. Drake in a genuine fight was always calm in a way he was not in training, a quality of attention that came from scale being appropriate rather than constrained. Left, Drake said. Issei moved left, and a ranged strike passed through the space where he had been. The primary commander. Elevated position. Behind the 3rd structural addition from the north wall. I see it. He reached the 3rd structural addition in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The primary commander was not what the prior sovereign's records had described. The prior sovereign had encountered the original garrison commander 6 centuries ago. What Issei found behind the 3rd structural addition was a successor, several generations removed, who had been raised inside Hub 6 and who had never experienced the network operating at full capacity, and who had been preparing for this confrontation for as long as they had known the restoration was underway. The fight for the primary commander lasted 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Issei did not track the seconds in the moment. He tracked them afterward, from the system log. In the moment he tracked the engagement the way he had learned to track everything, not the time but the state, the current condition of every relevant variable, the line between what was working and what needed to change. The primary commander was defeated at the 6-minute 11-second mark and the formation response began to degrade exactly as Rin had predicted, the command structure fracturing without its apex, the tactical officers improvising rather than coordinating. 2 tactical officers remained, the right flank officer was down, Kiba and Keiru's work, Akeno Issei said through the relay. 2nd tactical officer. North quadrant, 3rd ring level. Understood. Her voice was controlled and entirely focused. 40 seconds. Done, she said. 3rd tactical officer. Serorg. Already, Serorg said. 3 of 4. The 4th tactical officer had moved from their prepared position when the formation began to degrade. Issei pulled the overlay and found the repositioned signature in the hub's 2nd ring, moving toward the hub core. They are going to the core. To do what? Rias said. To damage it. If they cannot hold the hub, they will attempt to destroy what we came to restore. He was already moving. Rias, formation hold. Everyone else maintain current engagement. I need 90 seconds at the core. He moved through the hub's interior with the Shadow Army providing coverage on both sides and reached the core chamber at the same time as the 4th tactical officer. The fight in the core chamber lasted less than 2 minutes. The space was small enough that the invaders' ranged advantage was eliminated, and close engagement was where Issei's physical development over 16 weeks of leveled capacity had built the clearest differential. The 4th tactical officer went down. The hub core was intact. Issei stood in the core chamber and looked at the network node at its center, undamaged, 6 centuries of invader occupation around it, and the native architecture still holding beneath all of it. Drake. Formation status. Degraded significantly. Serorg and Kaneko have established a containment perimeter. The remaining formation elements are not in an organized posture. Casualties on our side. Minor. Kiba sustained a strike that Akeno has addressed. Everyone is operational. He exhaled once. Good. He placed his hand on the core node. The sovereign designation registered, and Hub 6 native architecture responded the way the other hub cores had responded, with immediate recognition and the beginning of the access protocol. Tell Rias, hold the perimeter for 10 more minutes and keep the formation contained. Do not pursue. Understood. He began the protocol, and through Keeper's relay across 400 kilometers to a cold mountain inner chamber where Asia was sitting with her left forearm warm and her attention entirely on the moment, he sent the signal. Asia felt it the moment it came, not words. Not an image. The unmistakable specificity of Keeper's communication, now. She placed her hand on Hub 4's inner node and initiated the sealing sequence. The network registered it at the same moment that Hub 6's protocol completed, a synchronized completion within a margin the commissioning record had specified as sufficient, and the network did what it had been built to do. The ejection protocol activated. Inside Hub 6, Issei felt it as a change in the air, not a physical change. A dimensional one. The hub's native architecture asserted itself through every surface, through every modification the invaders had made over 6 centuries, through the structural additions and the conversion remnants and the command infrastructure, and it said, in the non-word language of a system that had been waiting 600 years for full network restoration, this space is not yours. The remaining formation elements responded with panic, which was the first time he had seen anything in this operation respond with panic, and then they were gone. Not displaced. Gone, in the way the commissioning record's ambiguous language about the ejection protocol had not fully clarified. The ejection was not a door. It was a removal from the dimensional architecture itself, and what waited on the other side of that removal was not anything the network had specified. The hub was empty. The hub was intact. Issei stood in the core chamber of Hub 6 in the sudden quiet and listened to the network complete its first full restoration diagnostic in 600 years. It sounded like nothing audible. It felt like the pressure in the air easing, slowly, the way the pressure in a room eases when a window is opened in a house that has been closed too long. Drake, he said. Full network status, Drake said, and his voice had something in it that Issei had not heard before, something between wonder and satisfaction. 7 hubs operational. The diagnostic is running. The dimensional pressure differential is already adjusting. How long for full stabilization? Days. Possibly weeks. The system has been running at reduced capacity for 6 centuries. It will take time to recalibrate. A pause. But it is running. Issei looked at the core node and then at the hub around him, the native architecture visible now beneath all the invader modifications, the original design of the first architects present and intact and active for the first time in 600 years. He thought about a young man who had climbed a mountain and written 4 words. He thought about a family in Kyoto that had maintained a seal across generations without knowing why. He thought about Asia in a cold mountain chamber, waiting for a signal. Then he turned and went back to his team. Chapter 36. The Weight of Completion. After. They came back to the surface in the afternoon. The boat was where the captain had held it, patient in the offshore swell, and they boarded in order without any of the ceremony that completion might have warranted and that none of them had the current capacity to produce. Kiba sat down immediately and let Akeno finish addressing the strike he had taken to his left shoulder. Kaneko stood at the rail and looked at the water. Serorg took a position at the bow and was still in a way that was not quite the stillness of someone at rest. Rias stood beside Issei as the captain turned the boat for shore. She did not say anything for several minutes. The water moved under them and the afternoon was warm and very ordinary in the way that afternoons were ordinary when something unusual had just occurred. Then she said, "How do you feel?" He considered the question. It was not a question he was asked often, and when he was asked it, it was usually by someone who wanted a specific kind of answer. Rias asked it the way she asked operational questions. She wanted the accurate answer, not the expected one. "Tired," he said. "And certain." "Certain of what?" "That the work is not finished." Hub 7. The network maintenance. The approach vector the invaders used that is still an unknown. He looked at the water. "There is more to do." "There is always more to do," she said. And it was not agreement, exactly, or disagreement. It was acknowledgement. "Yes," he said. A pause. "You came back," she said. "Yes." She did not say anything else about it. She did not need to. She turned back to the shore growing in front of them and stood beside him for the rest of the crossing, and the boat moved through the ordinary afternoon, and somewhere in the mountain range above Nagano, Asia was beginning the long descent back to the trail, with Keeper quiet in her arm and the hub sealed behind her, and the network diagnostic running across all 7 hubs for the first time in 600 years. The debrief was that evening, at the house, with everyone present including Asia who had arrived by Shinkansen at 2047 and had eaten an entire bowl of rice standing at the kitchen counter before she could be persuaded to sit down. Issei ran the formal debrief in the East study, timeline reconstruction, event-to-plan comparison, outcome assessment, identified variances and their causes. The 4th Tactical Officer's repositioning had been the primary variance from plan. The response time had been adequate, but the identification had taken 11 seconds longer than the simulation estimate. He logged it. After the formal debrief, Rin said, "The ejection protocol. What happened to them?" "I do not know," Issei said honestly. The commissioning record was ambiguous. The result was a dimensional removal from the hub architecture. What the receiving environment on the other side of that removal is, I cannot confirm. Ren nodded. He did not pursue it further, and Issei noted that he had accepted the honest answer rather than pushing for a comfortable one. Kaoru asked about the hub modification structures, the 6 centuries of invader additions that were still physically present in Hub 6's interior. Issei told her the network diagnostic would integrate that question. The first architect's commissioning record had included modification assessment protocols, and the network would determine which additions were compatible with hub function and which required removal. That could take months, she said. Yes. Hub 6 will require the longest post-restoration work of any hub. But the core is intact and the network is running. Serorg, at the end of the debrief, said, "The pillar assembly? Your assessment, as we discussed. A week. I want to draft the presentation carefully. The political weight of what the network is and what its restoration means requires framing that prevents it from becoming a point of contention between factions before people have understood what it actually does." Agreed. I will have the full technical documentation ready by Thursday. The debrief ended. People dispersed. The house settled into a quiet that was different from the quiet before an operation, the specific quiet of a thing resolved. Issei sat at the East study desk for a long time. Then he opened the Hub 7 working file and began to read. He found Kaneko in the kitchen at midnight. She was doing what she had done the night before the Hub 1 operation, a pattern he had come to recognize. When something significant had concluded, she processed it in the kitchen in the dark, not eating, just present in a space that was familiar and required nothing of her. He made tea for both of them and sat across from her at the table. She looked at the tea for a moment. Hub 7, she said. It is the last one. Through Hub 4. Through Hub 4. 2 vector authorization. Asia and the relay function. She can do it. She demonstrated that today. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Hub 7 is the backup core. We do not know what we will find. That is the honest position. Kaneko was quiet. What do you think we will find, she said. He considered. Something the first architects considered important enough to protect behind a 2-vector access requirement and an emergency protocol. Something that they designed the entire network to preserve if the primary installation was ever compromised. He paused. Something they wanted whoever came after them to find. She looked at him. That is a lot of something, she said. Yes, he agreed. They drank their tea in the quiet kitchen. After a while she said, the prior sovereign? He never got to Hub 4. Never found Hub 7. No. He did everything he could. Yes. Another silence. I think he would have wanted to know how it ended, she said. Issei thought about the 4 words on the Hub 4 notation. Do not enter alone. The note was addressed to someone, specifically. Not a general warning. A direct communication from someone who had understood that the path forward required something he had not had. I think he knew someone would come, Issei said. He built what he could and left directions for the rest. Kaneko finished her tea. Then we should not keep him waiting too long, she said. She put her cup in the sink and went to bed. Issei sat alone in the kitchen for a while longer, in the quiet house, with the network running its first full-capacity diagnostic in 6 centuries somewhere in the dimensional architecture beneath the surface of the world. Then he went to the East study, opened the Hub 7 planning file to a new page, and began. Act 5, The Final Gate. Chapter 37, The File That Would Not Open. 0447 hours. The East study. The Hub 7 planning file had been open on the desk for 9 days. Issei had written 11 lines in those 9 days. He had deleted 9 of them. The 2 that remained were a coordinate set and a single question: what is different here? He had not yet answered the question, which was unusual. When he did not answer a question within 48 hours, the system flagged it with a yellow border. The yellow border had been present for 7 days. He read the prior sovereign's inheritance record again. Not the architectural blueprints or the network expansion protocols, which he had memorized in the first 48 hours. The voice message? The 4 words the prior sovereign had written for the researcher who never came. The 4 words were, I could not reach. The prior sovereign had cleared 6 hubs. Had accumulated shadows beyond what the records could track. Had built relationships with every major faction that acknowledged his existence, which most eventually did. Had received independent territorial recognition from 3 separate governing bodies across the supernatural world. Had done everything Issei had done and more, according to the inheritance records, and had not reached Hub 7. The gate speaker had not explained why. When Issei had asked, 3 days after the Hub 6 operation, the gate speaker had said, the information is preserved in the hub. That was not an answer. The gate speaker knew it was not an answer. Issei had not asked again because pressing the gate speaker before approaching Hub 7 seemed like the kind of decision that would not age well. He picked up the pen. Wrote a 3rd line in the file. Prior sovereign stopped. Did not write what that meant operationally. He knew what it meant. He had known since he read the 4 words, and the knowing had been sitting in the back of his thinking for 9 days like a structural load he had not finished calculating. The prior sovereign had not failed at Hub 7. The prior sovereign had not attempted Hub 7. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. The system overlay came up at 0512 without prompting. This was not standard behavior. The overlay came up when he accessed it, not before. He looked at it for 3 seconds before reading the new field. Network status, 6 of 8 hubs restored. Remaining, Hub 7, primary anchor. Hub 4, secondary anchor, functional. System note, Hub 7 restoration required for full network activation. Current network operating at 71% capacity. Full activation projected outcome, dimensional stability increase across 14 connected planes. Threshold event probability with continued partial operation, 23% within 18 months. He read the last line twice. Threshold event. The system had not used that language before. He flagged it, wrote a query, and received the expansion in 4 seconds. A threshold event was a dimensional instability cascade. If the network continued operating below full capacity for long enough, the stress accumulated. The prior sovereign had stopped the immediate damage when the invaders were ejected. Had not completed the restoration. The network had been holding at partial capacity for 6 centuries, and the stress accumulation was now past the point where it would hold indefinitely. 18 months. 23% probability. He closed the overlay. Wrote a 4th line in the file, timeline constraint established. Wrote a 5th, 18 months, 23%. Circled it twice. The question was no longer whether to approach Hub 7. The question was how. 0730 hours, the kitchen. Rias was already there when he came down. She had a cup of something hot, and was reading from a thin folder. She looked up when he entered, read his expression, and put the folder down. New information, she said. Last night. The system updated the network status projection. He poured water, leaned against the counter, and told her about the threshold event and the 18-month window. He gave her the exact numbers because she always wanted exact numbers, which was something she had learned from him and something he had noticed without remarking on it. She was quiet for a moment. The prior sovereign stopped. Yes. You have information he did not have. I have Keeper, he said. And Asia's relay confirmed functional across 400 kilometers. The prior sovereign operated alone. The inheritance record does not mention anyone comparable to what we have. He paused. I also have the ejection protocol. He stopped the invaders without it. We have already used it successfully at Hub 6. Rias picked up the folder again, set it down again without opening it. When do you want to brief the group? Tonight. I need the full day to finish the approach assessment. The gate speaker has been available since the Hub 6 debrief. I have not asked yet because I wanted the baseline picture complete before I introduced variables. That is a very careful way to say you wanted to think it through alone first. He looked at her. She was not wrong. Yes, he said. She nodded. Tonight then. She picked up her folder and walked out of the kitchen, and he stood there for a moment in the quiet and thought about the 4 words the prior sovereign had left behind, and then he went upstairs to finish the assessment. Chapter 38. What the gate speaker carried. 1,100 hours. The East Field. The gate speaker arrived through the standard dimensional seam at the field's eastern edge. This was the location they always used now, established after the second time the speaker had arrived through the kitchen wall and startled Kaneko badly enough that she had thrown a dish at the point of entry. Issei was already outside. He had the Hub 7 file on a clipboard, which was a format he preferred for field conversations because it gave him something to mark directly rather than transcribing to a separate document. The gate speaker's presence settled. It did not have a physical form in any conventional sense, but it had developed what Issei thought of as a conversational density, a way of being present that communicated attention without requiring a face or a voice box. It communicated in impressions that the system translated, and the translations had become more precise over the course of their working relationship. Hub 7, Issei said. The gate speaker was quiet for a moment, that translated as careful. Then, Hub 7 is the original installation. The others were extensions. Hub 7 was the point from which the network was built outward, and it is the point to which the network is oriented. The first architects placed the primary network consciousness there. Primary network consciousness, Issei said. Not a fragment like Keeper. Not a guardian like the entity at Hub 4. The network itself. Yes. What you encountered at the other hubs were partial expressions. Subsystems. Hub 7 contains the integrated whole. The invaders understood this. Their effort at Hub 6, their largest installation, was an attempt to reach a point from which they could influence Hub 7 without entering it directly. They failed. They were stopped. There is a distinction. The work they completed at Hub 6 had produced partial influence on Hub 7's outer architecture before the ejection protocol activated. The outer architecture is damaged in a way the other hubs were not. It is not structural damage. It is more accurately described as defensive hardening that became self-reinforcing. Hub 7 closed itself when the invaders reached it. It has not reopened. Issei wrote on the clipboard, closed itself. He looked at the words. The prior sovereign could not reach it because it would not open. The gate speaker's conversational density shifted in a way that translated as something between sorrow and confirmation. The prior sovereign arrived at Hub 7 4 months after the ejection. He spent 6 weeks attempting to establish contact with the primary network consciousness. He was not refused. He was not recognized. Hub 7 had sealed its recognition protocols as a defensive measure. It was not capable of identifying a valid sovereign at that point. And now you have restored 6 hubs. The subsystems recognize you. They have been communicating your profile to Hub 7's outer architecture for the duration of the restoration work. You have been building a credential record without knowing it. The gate speaker paused. Whether Hub 7's recognition protocols have sufficiently recovered to process that record is something I cannot determine from outside. I do not have access to Hub 7's interior. I have not had access since the sealing, but the probability is better than it was for the prior sovereign. Substantially better. You have something else he did not have. He paused in the way that translated as deliberate. You have Keeper. The primary network consciousness knows Keeper. Keeper was not sealed out because Keeper is part of the network architecture at a level below the defensive hardening. If Keeper can establish an internal relay before you arrive at the outer boundary, Hub 7 may recognize the approach differently than it recognized his. Issei was quiet for a moment. He wrote, Keeper as advance relay. He wrote, test Keeper's reach toward Hub 7 before approach. He wrote, do not commit to timeline until relay confirmed. The threshold event projection, he said. 18 months, 23%. The system gave me that last night. The gate speaker's density changed again. I am aware of the projection. I have been aware of it for longer than the system has been able to express it numerically. I did not present it to you earlier because I judged that you needed to complete the Hub 6 operation before the constraint became relevant to your planning. If I was wrong about that timing, I apologize. You were not wrong, Issei said. He closed the clipboard. Thank you. The gate speaker did not reply in words. It communicated something that translated most closely as, I have been waiting 600 years for someone to say that to me, and I had not expected that it would feel like anything in particular, and I find that I was incorrect about that. Issei looked at the field for a moment. Then he went inside to begin the Keeper relay test. 1430 hours, the study inner room. Keeper existed in a different way than the shadows did. The shadows were extracted presences, reshaped and loyal, oriented entirely toward their function within the sovereign network. They were complete in their roles. Keeper was something else, an original piece of the network architecture that had developed awareness across 6 centuries of isolation, and the awareness had not simplified her the way isolation simplified most things. It had made her more complex, more careful, more in ways that were difficult to quantify but that the system flagged consistently as significant. He reached through the shadow relay to the connection point they had established in Kyoto. Keeper was present immediately. She had been present, as far as he could tell, every time he reached for her, which suggested she maintained continuous awareness of the relay rather than monitoring it at intervals. I need to ask you something that may be difficult, he said. Keeper communicated acknowledgement. She always waited for the full question. Hub 7. The primary network consciousness. Can you reach it from where you are? Not communicate fully, not establish a two-way exchange. Just reach it enough to carry a signal. Enough to communicate that I am coming and that you are coming with me. The silence that followed was longer than Keeper's usual processing time. He waited without prompting. The system flagged the silence as significant, and he dismissed the flag. Then Keeper communicated something that took him a moment to parse. She had attempted to reach Hub 7 twice before, she said. Once when she first became aware of her own function, which she estimated at roughly 200 years after the sealing. Once after the Kyoto Hub restoration, when his presence had strengthened her network integration to the point where she thought a longer reach might be possible. Both attempts had encountered the sealed outer architecture. She had not told him about either attempt because she had judged them failures and had not wanted to introduce a variable into his planning that she could not quantify. What was different between the two attempts? The second attempt had reached further. She had touched the outer architecture's edge in the second attempt. She had felt the hardening and the defensive orientation, and she had also felt something inside it that she described as awareness of the attempt, a sense that something within Hub 7 knew she was there even if it could not respond. After the 6 restorations, he said. What do you project for a third attempt now? Keeper was quiet again. Then she communicated a word that the system translated as possible. He wrote possible in the Hub 7 file. Underlined it. Try tonight, he said. I will be here. If you reach it, do not push further. Just hold the connection and tell me what you find. Keeper communicated acknowledgement. She communicated something else beneath it, something that did not translate cleanly, but that the system rendered as, I have been part of this network for a very long time and I have not been this close to the rest of it in all of that time, and I find that I do not have a word for what that is, and perhaps that is appropriate because it is not something that has existed before. He closed the relay. Sat with his hands flat on the desk for a moment. Then he started writing the briefing notes for tonight. Chapter 39, The Briefing and the Weight of It. 2000 hours, the main room. He had written 3 pages of briefing notes, and had reduced them to 11 points, which he read from the clipboard rather than presenting from memory. He did this when the information was complicated enough that he wanted the group to track the sequence rather than absorb a prepared summary. Kiba had noticed this distinction months ago and had pointed it out to Akeno. Issei had not acknowledged that he had noticed them noticing, because some things were allowed to exist without comment. The 11 points took 22 minutes. He did not rush them and did not simplify the threshold event projection. 23% in 18 months was a number the group deserved to have in its full context, which meant they needed the dimensional instability cascade definition and they needed to understand what a 23% probability meant operationally, not certain, not negligible, not something that justified panic, but something that justified the next step. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Kaneko said, How many shadows do you currently have? 214, he said. Including the 4 Warden class extractions from Gate 16 and Kuru. And the prior sovereign stopped with more than that. According to the inheritance records, yes. The records are incomplete past a certain point. He did not stop because he ran out of shadows. Kaneko absorbed this. He stopped because Hub 7 would not open. Correct. And your argument is that it will open for you because you have Keeper, and because the 6 restorations have built a credential record. Those are factors. Not certainties. Kaneko looked at him for a moment in the way she had developed, which was direct and precise and contained no performance of either confidence or concern. Okay, she said, which was her way of saying she had processed the variable, and was moving to the next question. Akeno asked about the approach distance, and whether the sealed outer architecture was hostile or passive. He told her what the gate speaker had said, the hardening was defensive, self-reinforcing, but not actively aggressive. It was a door that would not open rather than a door that pushed back. The distinction mattered for the approach. Asia asked about her role. He told her what he had been thinking since the Hub 4 operation. She was the relay anchor for Keeper, and she was the network's first emergency point if something went wrong inside the outer architecture, and the shadow relay was disrupted. She was not the last line. She was the communications infrastructure. The distinction, he said, was not trivial. She nodded. She had the notebook open. She wrote something in it. He did not ask what. Kiba asked the question he had expected Kiba to ask. What happens if Hub 7 does not recognize the approach even with Keeper's relay? What is the contingency? I return, Issei said. I do not force entry. The prior sovereign spent 6 weeks attempting contact. If it does not work at first approach, we assess and try again. The 18-month window is a constraint, not an emergency. We have time to do this correctly. Kiba accepted this. He had the quality of a person who always hoped for a more aggressive option and was consistently capable of accepting the correct one. Rias had not asked a question yet. He looked at her. You said we, she said. He considered this. The team enters the hub boundary together. Keeper's relay functions best when I am within direct connection range of Asia. This is not a solo approach. Rias was quiet for a moment. Good, she said, and it was a word she used carefully, and he understood what she meant by it, and he did not say so because some things were allowed to exist without comment. 2,315 hours. The study. Keeper made contact at 2341. He felt it through the relay before she communicated it explicitly, a change in the connection's texture that was different from anything he had felt before. Keeper's presence was usually precise and contained, a clean signal. What he felt now was Keeper's signal, and something else running beneath it, deep and slow and old in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the kind of awareness that develops when something has been maintaining a purpose for 600 years in isolation. Keeper communicated, contact established. Outer architecture responsive. Carrying your signal. He sat completely still. Then the something else moved. It did not speak in words. It did not communicate in impressions the way the gate speaker did. It communicated in a way that he did not have a category for, something that came in through the relay connection and the Grail shards simultaneously, and that Drake felt at the same moment he did, because he heard Drake's presence shift from background to attention without prompting. What it communicated was a question. Not in words. More fundamental than words. The question translated, as closely as language could approximate it, as, "Are you the one who is restoring the network?" He answered without speaking aloud. Yes. The something else communicated again. This one translated as, "I have been waiting." Then the contact closed. Not severed, not hostile. Closed the way a door closes when the person on the other side has confirmed who is knocking and gone to make preparations. He sat in the dark study for a long time. Keeper was still present in the relay, quiet and waiting. She recognized you, he said aloud, mostly to Drake. Drake said, she recognized us. There is a distinction and it matters. He sat with that for a moment. Then he opened the Hub 7 file and wrote a 6th line, primary network consciousness responsive. Recognize the approach. Wrote a 7th line, do not delay. Wrote an 8th, tell the group in the morning. He closed the file. Went to the window. The city was dark and quiet, and the stars were the same stars they had always been, which he found, for a reason he could not immediately explain, to be exactly what he needed to see. Chapter 40. What each person does when they know. The day before, various locations. He told them at 0700. He said what had happened with Keeper and the contact at 2341, and what the primary network consciousness had communicated. He gave them the translation caveat because the translation was an approximation and approximations mattered when the information was this significant. Then he said, we go tomorrow at 0900. He gave them the day. Kiba went to the dojo at 0800 and did not leave until 1600. He worked through every sword form he knew, not because the forms would be relevant inside Hub 7, but because the forms were the language his body used to think clearly about things it could not think about in words. He had learned this about himself in the 2nd month after joining the peerage, and he had never told anyone directly, though he suspected Rias knew and that Issei had noted it without flagging it. He did not think about what might go wrong inside Hub 7. He was not built for catastrophic projection, and he knew it, and he had made peace with it years before. What he thought about, working through the forms in the early light, was what it meant to be part of something that was building toward completion. He had been raised with the concept of a purpose, had had his original purpose taken from him, had spent years reorienting around a different one. What he was doing now felt, in the precise and careful way he examined his own internal states, like the thing the second purpose had always been building toward. He finished the last form at 1557. He cleaned the practice sword and hung it. He went to find something to eat. Akeno spent the morning in the archive. The Underworld archive access that came with the independent territorial sovereign classification had been one of the most consistently useful resources of the past months, and she had developed a research practice around it that was specific to her. She approached it as a cross-referencing problem rather than a search problem, looking for patterns across documents rather than specific answers. She had found things in it that Issei had not looked for because he had not known to look for them, and she had brought those findings to him in the structured format he preferred, and he had incorporated them without ceremony. This morning she was not researching. She was reading. There was a section of the archive dedicated to what it called dimensional resonance theory, which was a category of supernatural study that had largely been abandoned 4 centuries ago as impractical. She had found it 2 weeks prior and had been returning to it because something in it resonated with what she had experienced during the hub operations, particularly the moments when Issei's shadow relay had been active, and she had been maintaining external environmental suppression. There was a quality to the energy involved in those moments that the resonance theory documents described, not precisely, but close enough that she wanted to understand the gap. She read until noon. She did not find the gap. She found instead that the gap was the interesting part, the place where the existing theory stopped, and where what they had been doing simply extended past the edge of what anyone had thought to map. She closed the archive at 12:15. She went to the kitchen and made tea and thought about the edge of the map. Kaneko sat on the back roof from 0900 to 1100 without moving. She was not meditating in any formal sense. She was not processing in the way that word usually implied, a movement through states toward a conclusion. She was doing something more basic. She was sitting with the fact of tomorrow and letting it be the size it was without managing it down into something smaller. The fact was this: Issei had been building toward Hub 7 since the night he came back from the cemetery. Everything between that night and tomorrow had been preparation, in one form or another. The training, the gates, the raiding game, the hub restorations, the political work. All of it had been oriented toward the thing that was happening tomorrow. She had known this for some time, in the back of her thinking where the things she was not ready to examine lived, and now she was examining it, and finding that it was not frightening. It was very large, and it was real, and it was tomorrow. She went inside at 1100. She made something to eat. She found Asia in the kitchen, also making something to eat, and they sat together without speaking much, which was the kind of companionship that had grown up between them naturally over the past months, and that she valued precisely because it did not require maintenance. Asia spent the afternoon writing in her notebook. She had 3 notebooks now. The first one had been full since the Hub 3 operation, and she had kept it because it contained her initial impressions of everything from the system briefings to the first time Keeper had communicated through the relay in a way Asia could feel from the outside. The second notebook was half full. The third was new. She had bought it the day after the Hub 6 operation because she had known, then, that they would reach Hub 7 eventually, and she wanted a clean notebook for it. She wrote what she knew about her role, the relay anchor, the communications infrastructure, the emergency connection point. She wrote what she knew about Keeper and what she understood of the primary network consciousness from Issei's account. She wrote a question she had been carrying for several weeks. When the network is fully restored, what does that mean for Keeper? Does Keeper return to the primary network? Does she stay as a distinct presence? Is that a question Keeper has been asked? She paused on the question. She would ask it after Hub 7, she decided. Not before. Some questions belong to the other side of things. She wrote one more thing at the bottom of the page, in the margin, small: I am glad I found this. Then she closed the notebook and went to see if anyone wanted to take a walk before dinner. Rias spent the evening on the phone. There were 6 calls. The first was to Serorg, who had been briefed on the Hub 7 situation 2 days prior and who said, on receiving the confirmation of tomorrow's timeline, I will be available. Tell me what you need from here. She told him what she needed, which was primarily the standing rapid response capacity he had committed to the network work from the beginning, and he confirmed it without qualification. The second call was to Sona Citri, who had known about the network work in general outlines since the raiding game and who had become, in the months since, a functional secondary information node for the supernatural political landscape. Sona absorbed the Hub 7 timeline, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, "I will keep the usual monitoring active. If anything develops in the political layer that requires attention, I will manage it for the next 72 hours. Rias thanked her. Sona said, "Your whole group is going in, I assume." Rias said yes. Sona said, "Good. Let me know what you find." The other 4 calls were shorter. Administrative. The kind of work that needed to be done before a significant operation so that nothing accumulated in the background while attention was elsewhere. She finished at 2100 and sat in the main room for a while. The house was quieter than usual. Not tense. She thought about what Issei had said in the kitchen 9 days ago, that the question was how rather than whether. He had been right then, and he was right now. The question had always been how, and the answer had been assembled piece by piece across 6 months of work, and tomorrow they would see if the assembly held. She thought about the 4 words the prior sovereign had left behind. She thought about the kind of person who would leave 4 words and whether 4 words was a choice or a limit, or both. She thought it was probably both. Issei spent the evening in the East study, working. This was not unusual. What was unusual was what he was working on. He had finished the approach assessment 2 days prior. He had nothing left to prepare for Hub 7 that had not already been prepared. What he was working on was the Phase 3 outline, the network expansion protocol that the Hub 1 inheritance had described as the next step after full restoration, the 7-month design work that would begin once the primary network was operational again. He was not preparing for the possibility that Hub 7 would not work. He was preparing for the certainty that it would, because the approach plan was sound and the credential record was built, and Keeper had made contact and the primary network consciousness had communicated that it was waiting, and if he was wrong about any of those factors he would find out tomorrow, and he would adjust. He did not find it useful to spend tonight preparing for adjustments that he did not yet have the information to make. What he found useful was having the Phase 3 outline ready. Because if tomorrow went the way the evidence suggested it would go, there would be work to do immediately after. The network, once restored, would need coordination. The 7-month design phase would need to begin before the political and factional attention that a full network activation would attract had time to create complications. He wrote for 3 hours. He went to bed at 0100. He slept without difficulty, which was the thing Drake had told him to do the night before Hub 6, and which he had been able to manage with increasing consistency since then. Chapter 41, The Distance to Hub 7. 0900 hours, departure. Hub 7 was not in Japan. This was different from all the other hubs. The inheritance record had given coordinates and a regional context: northern Iceland, a volcanic plateau at roughly 1200 meters elevation, accessible by foot from the nearest road at a distance of approximately 9 kilometers. The first architects had placed the primary anchor at a point of exceptional geological stability, a location where the tectonic structure had not shifted meaningfully in several million years. The irony of the most stable anchor on the network being located on a volcanic island was something Issei had noted and not commented on. They flew commercial as far as Reykjavik and took a smaller aircraft north. The logistics had been arranged 3 days prior when the Keeper contact made the timeline concrete. Serorg had provided credentials through one of his family's continental contacts that simplified the travel considerably. The plateau, from the air, was gray basalt and sparse vegetation and occasional patches of snow that had not entirely melted in the brief summer. The lava fields were ancient and smooth-worn, the kind of landscape that communicated geological time without trying. Issei looked at it from the aircraft window and thought about what it meant to choose a location. The first architects had not placed the primary anchor somewhere beautiful, or accessible, or politically central. They had placed it somewhere that would still be there. They landed at a small airfield. They drove 2 hours north on a road that eventually stopped being a road in any conventional sense and became a track. They left the vehicle at the track's end, at a small marked waypoint that did not appear on any civilian map but that appeared precisely on the coordinates set in the Hub 7 file. 9 kilometers. They walked. The plateau was quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of enclosed spaces or nighttime urban streets. It was quiet in the way that large open geography is quiet, where sound carries but there is no source to carry it from, and the ambient noise is wind and rock and the occasional distant geothermal vent. The sky was the low silver of northern summer, either fully day nor fully night, a quality of light that had no equivalent further south. They walked without speaking much. Not because the situation required silence but because the landscape seemed to invite it. Kaneko moved across the basalt with the particular sure-footedness she had always had. Kiba walked slightly to the outside of the formation, as he had in every field operation, the placement so habitual it was architectural. Akeno kept pace without difficulty, and occasionally looked at the sky with an expression that was hard to read at a distance. Asia walked next to Issei. She had the notebook in the outer pocket of her pack, not open, just present. She had not written in it this morning, which was different from the hub approaches, where she had written something in it every morning of the preparation period. He noticed this and did not comment on it. At the 6-kilometer mark, the system overlay activated and remained active without prompting. The Hub 7 indicator appeared as a deep blue point that was not entirely visible in the usual sense. It was more accurate to say it was present, in the overlay and slightly beyond the overlay at the same time, as if the display was insufficient for what it was indicating. He looked at it for a moment. Then he checked the Keeper relay. Keeper was active and close, which was not physically accurate since she was in Kyoto, but was the correct description of how her presence felt through the connection. She communicated, "Ready when you are." He communicated back, 400 meters. They walked the last 400 meters. The boundary. He felt the boundary before he saw it. The Sovereign Recognition Protocol had activated at the Hub 1 approach as a formal sequence, a structured handshake that had taken several minutes. What activated now was not a sequence. It was a state. The entire plateau around Hub 7 was already in recognition mode. Had been, he realized, since the contact at 2341 4 nights ago. The primary network consciousness had not simply acknowledged the approach and closed the connection. It had begun the preparation. The outer architecture was visible here in a way the other hubs had not been. The other hubs had been invisible until you were inside the dimensional seam, or until the system overlay illuminated them. Hub 7 was visible directly, without overlay assistance, as a distortion in the air approximately 30 meters in diameter, the kind of visual effect that the brain tried to explain as heat shimmer before conceding that it was something else entirely. It was not aggressive. It was not welcoming. It was present in the way that a very large and very old thing is present when it has been waiting for something and that something has arrived. The group stopped at the edge of the visible distortion. "Keeper," Issei said aloud. Keeper communicated through the relay. She was projecting inward through the outer architecture. She communicated, "The defensive hardening is active but permeable to my presence. I am carrying your signal." She paused. "She is aware of me. She is aware of you." The distortion shifted, not dramatically. It did not open like a door or expand like a field. The quality of it changed. The something that had communicated with him 4 nights ago was present at the boundary now, not communicating in words or impressions but in a way that was more direct than either. It communicated recognition. It communicated preparation complete. It communicated enter. He looked at the group. Asia had her hand on the notebook pocket. Kaneko met his eyes and gave the slight nod that meant she was ready. Kiba stood steady. Akeno's expression was the one she had when she was watching something she had been trying to understand and was about to understand it. Rias looked at him for a moment. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He turned back to the boundary and walked through it. Chapter 42, The Interior of the First Hub. Inside the boundary. The interior of Hub 7 was not like the other hubs. The other hubs had been spaces that corresponded approximately to physical locations. The underground chamber at Hub 1, the crystal-shelled enclosure at Hub 2, the mountain interior at Hub 4. They had been spaces that a person could navigate with physical movement and spatial awareness. Hub 7 was a space that existed at the intersection of dimensional architecture and accumulated time and something else that the system categorized as primary network matrix, and that Issei's own perception categorized as the feeling of standing inside the skeleton of something that was very nearly alive. The visual environment was dark in a way that was not the absence of light. It was more accurately described as the presence of depth, a space that extended in directions that were not conventionally spatial. The matrix structure was visible as a lattice of blue-gray lines that the system overlay aligned with exactly, which told him the overlay was working from the hub's own structural data rather than from his external perception. He had not experienced this at the other hubs. The other hubs had required him to overlay the system map onto what he was seeing. Hub 7 was already mapped. The group came through the boundary behind him. He heard each of them enter, the slight shift in their presence that the shadow relay registered even for the non-shadow members. He checked the relay. All 6 contacts present and steady. Asia's relay to Keeper steady. Keeper's position, interior, ahead deeper than his current depth. He followed Keeper's signal. The deeper architecture was older than the surface. He could feel the difference in the way you feel the difference in temperature when moving through layers of still water. The outer architecture was old. The inner architecture was something past the word old, something that had been in place long enough that it had become indistinguishable from the geometry of the space itself. The first architects had not built Hub 7. They had found the location, found the natural dimensional intersection, and shaped the structure around what was already there. The hub was a collaboration between design and discovery. He understood this with sudden clarity at approximately the 4th depth level, and the understanding shifted the way he was reading the space around him. This was not a building. It was a cultivation. The invaders had spent 6 centuries trying to influence it, and had left marks the way invasive work always leaves marks, the record of effort against something that was not designed to be influenced from outside. The marks were visible in the matrix lines as darker nodes, points of stress that had self-resolved over time but that the system flagged as damage records rather than current damage. The primary network consciousness had been repairing itself in the time since the ejection. Had not finished. Would not finish without the full network restored. He filed this away and kept moving. The center. The center of Hub 7 was a chamber that the system rendered as approximately 40 meters across, though approximate was doing significant work in that description. The dimensions were consistent but the space did not feel 40 meters across. It felt the size of whatever you needed it to be for the purpose you had come with, which was either a very sophisticated architectural property, or a very sophisticated psychological one, and he suspected it was both. Keeper was here. Her presence in the hub interior was more physical than it had ever been through the relay. She existed in the hub as part of its architecture, which was what the gate speaker had said, below the defensive hardening, part of the network at a level that the ceiling had not reached. She had been present here this whole time, he realized. In the hub but unable to communicate with its center. 6 centuries as part of a space she could not fully inhabit. The primary network consciousness was here too. He had started thinking of her as she, did not have a physical form. She had a presence that was to Keeper's presence what an ocean is to a river, the same kind of thing but different in scope in a way that the numbers did not quite capture. She communicated in the fundamental language she had used 4 nights ago, the one that came through the Grail shard and through the relay simultaneously, and that Drake received as clearly as he did. The communication was, "You completed the work," he said aloud, 6 of the 8 hubs. The 7th is here. I need to understand what is required for full restoration. She communicated, "You are standing in it." It took him a moment to understand what she meant. Then the system overlay updated with information he had not had before, a full restoration protocol that came from the hub's own architecture rather than from the inheritance records, which the inheritance records had been working from incompletely. The prior sovereign had received his inheritance from Hub 1, which had been the first restored hub and which had contained the network expansion protocol. What Hub 1 had not contained was the restoration protocol for Hub 7 itself, because Hub 7 had still been sealed when the prior sovereign completed Hub 1 and received the inheritance. What the restoration protocol showed was this: Hub 7 did not require clearance. It did not have an ejection protocol to activate because it had never been converted. What it required was the presence of a validated sovereign with sufficient network integration, carrying an active connection to a recognized network subentity at the hub's center. The validation was the credential record built across 6 restorations. The network integration was the shadow network and the Grail shard and the system itself. The recognized subentity was Keeper. The restoration had already begun when he walked through the boundary. It had been in progress since 2341 4 nights ago, when the primary network consciousness acknowledged the approach. It required, the protocol indicated, a final deliberate act from the sovereign. Not a combat act. Not an extraction. An act of connection, a voluntary commitment of the sovereign's network integration to the hub's restoration matrix, which would allow the primary consciousness to complete the reconnection to the 6 restored hubs and reactivate the full network. He read the protocol 3 times. He understood it on the first read. He read it twice more because this was not the kind of decision he made at first read. It uses the sovereign integration, he said aloud, mostly to Drake. Drake said, it draws from it. It does not consume it. There is a distinction. I know. He looked at the center of the space, where the primary consciousness's presence was most dense. What does it feel like? From your perspective. When it happens. Drake was quiet for a moment. Then, like being heard by something that has been waiting to hear, he stood with that for a moment. Then he reached into the connection, the full network integration, every shadow in the network, Keeper, the Grail shard, Drake at the base of all of it, and he opened it, deliberately and completely, toward the restoration matrix. Chapter 43, Full Network Activation. Inside Hub 7, the restoration. What followed was not dramatic in the way that combat was dramatic. It was not the Hub 6 operation, which had been planned over 30 days and had involved 11 people and had ended with the synchronized ejection protocol, and the vast silence of a hub cleared of 94 entities. It was not the Hub 4 approach, with the Guardian who moved aside and the 5-second window through the invader seal and the transit to the secondary connection point discovered by accident, and turned away from deliberately. What followed was a process. The matrix lines around him brightened gradually. Not dramatically. The way the sky brightens before sunrise, which is a change you can track if you are paying attention, and that becomes undeniable only when it is nearly complete. The dark nodes in the deeper architecture, the invader damage records, dimmed as the restoration reconnected them to the primary signal. The lattice extended outward from the chamber in waves that the system tracked and documented in real time, and the system's documentation was a list of connections being re-established, each one identified by hub number and subsystem type, and he watched the list grow as Hub 1 and Hub 2 and Hub 3 and Hub 4 and Hub 5 and Hub 6 came back online in the primary network's view. The primary network consciousness communicated throughout this process. Not in words and not in the impressions the gate speaker used. In something that was the network's own language, which had no approximation in any spoken form but which translated experientially as the difference between a system operating at partial capacity and the same system operating at full capacity, the quality of function rather than the quantity of output. Drake was present through all of it, not speaking. Present in the way he was present when something significant was happening, and he had already said everything that needed to be said and was simply there. Issei had developed an understanding of Drake's various modes of presence over the past months, and this one was the one he valued most, the one that required nothing from either of them and simply was. The process took 11 minutes by the system's clock. He had expected longer. He had prepared himself for longer. The gate speaker had not been able to give him a duration estimate because the gate speaker had never been inside an active Hub 7 during restoration, and the inheritance records had not included the Hub 7 protocol. 11 minutes felt simultaneously too short and exactly right, which was the quality of events that had been in preparation for a very long time. At 11 minutes and 14 seconds, the system overlay updated with a single new field. Network status. Full restoration complete. All 8 hubs operational. Network operating at 100% capacity. Dimensional stability projection. 14 connected planes stabilized. Threshold event probability. less than 1% over 500-year projection period. He read it twice. Then he became aware of the group behind him, who had been present through all of it, and he turned around. They were standing in a line, which was not a formation they had adopted deliberately, and which had something to do with how the chamber's depth of space property functioned when you were not the one engaged with the primary consciousness. Asia's face was doing something he did not have a word for. The notebook was in her hands, not open, held in both hands in front of her like something she needed to have present without needing to use. Kaneko was looking at the matrix lines, which were still active and would likely remain active for some time. She had the expression she used when she was processing something too large for her usual efficiency, and had decided to let it take the time it took. Akeno was looking at him. She was not studying him the way she sometimes did, searching for gaps in what he was presenting. She was simply looking at him, directly, and her expression was a clear and uncomplicated version of something he had observed building in her across the whole of the past months. Kiba looked at the chamber around them, and then at Issei and said, very quietly, "We did it." Not a question. A statement made in the particular register of a person who has been working towards something for long enough that the arrival requires verbal confirmation to feel real. Yes, Issei said. Rias was standing slightly apart from the others, which was not a physical distance. She was looking at the center of the chamber where the primary consciousness's presence was still most dense, and her expression was one he had not seen before, the expression of someone who understood, fully and without reservation, the scope of what they were standing inside. She turned to him. "The prior sovereign's 4 words," she said. "I could not reach." She looked at the matrix lines still brightening. "I think he would have wanted to know this happened." Issei looked at the network overlay, the 8 connected hubs, the full restoration status, the threshold probability less than 1% over 500 years. "He does know," he said. "The network has the inheritance records. The prior sovereign's work is in the architecture. It was part of the foundation the whole time." Rias absorbed this. She nodded once, slowly. Then she turned back to the chamber and was quiet, and the group was quiet with her, and the network matrix continued its slow brightening around them, and the primary network consciousness was present throughout all of it, the way an ocean is present to everything it contains. Chapter 44, What the Network Sees Now. Hub 7, 2 hours after restoration. The primary network consciousness had a name. Or more precisely, she had a designation within the network architecture that was the first component the first architects had encoded, the initial identifier from which everything else had been built. The system translated it as a single concept without a direct equivalent in any human language, but the closest approximation was something like, "the one who holds the shape of things." Issei had asked her what to call her in communication. She had communicated, "What Keeper calls me." He had gone through the relay to Keeper and asked. Keeper communicated back a word in the network's own internal language. He had asked the system for the best human language phonetic equivalent. The system had given him, Mira. He had told the group. Asia had written it in the notebook immediately. Mira communicated in the 2 hours after restoration with an increasing precision that was itself a restoration process. She had been communicating at a fraction of her capacity since the sealing, and the full reconnection was expanding that capacity in real time. The communications that came through in the first hour were still impression-based, the fundamental language. By the second hour, with the system's translation architecture and the Grail Shard's resonance, she was communicating in something that came through as full sentences. She said, "The 14 connected planes are confirmed stable. The dimensional pressure readings are the lowest recorded in network history since the invader incursion began." She said, "The network expansion protocol from Hub 1's inheritance is now actionable. The 7-month design phase can begin when the Sovereign determines appropriate." She said, "Keeper may choose her role in the restored network. This is not a direction. This is what the network offers to a sub-entity that has maintained its function in isolation for an extended period under difficult conditions. The network honors that." She said, "There is an archive in Hub 7 that the prior Sovereign did not access because he did not reach the interior. The archive contains the complete operational history of the network from its construction through the invader incursion and through the sealing. It is available to the Sovereign and to anyone the Sovereign designates. Akeno looked at him when Mira said this. He told Akeno, "It is yours to access whenever you want," she said toward the end of the second hour. "You should rest. The dimensional commitment you made for the restoration draws from the sovereign integration in a way that is not permanent but that requires time. The system will indicate when you are at full capacity again. It will be approximately 16 hours. He had not noticed the draw on the integration until she named it. He checked the system. She was correct. He was at approximately 71% of his normal integration depth. Not dangerous. Not urgent. Requiring rest. 16 hours, he repeated. She communicated something that translated as gentle confirmation, with an undertone that the system categorized as, "You have earned this rest, and the network will be here when you wake." Kaneko heard him repeat the 16 hours and said, "I brought food." She had. She produced it from her pack with the efficiency she brought to everything, and the groups sat in the hub chamber and ate, which was possibly the most unusual meal any of them had ever had, and definitely the most significant, and none of them tried to make it smaller than it was by filling the quiet with unnecessary words. Chapter 45, Keeper's Choice. Hub 7 Evening. He reached Keeper through the relay at 1700. Her presence in the relay had changed since the restoration. She was still in Kyoto in the sense that the hub structure was there, and the network node she inhabited was there. But the quality of her presence was different. He had noticed it first immediately after Myra's statement about Keeper's Choice and had not addressed it directly because he had wanted to give her time to process before asking. "Myra said you could choose your role in the restored network," he said. "I want you to know that whatever you choose is correct. There is no answer here that is wrong." Keeper was quiet for a moment in the way that was not hesitation but careful assembly. Then she communicated, "I have been thinking about this since the contact at 2341 4 days ago, when I first felt the full network present through the connection. Before that, the network was what I was part of but could not fully perceive. In the contact, I could perceive all of it. I did not know what I had been unable to perceive until I could perceive it." She paused. "I did not expect it to feel like that." He waited. She communicated, "The choice is not simple in the way you might expect it to be. I am part of the network architecture. I am also a distinct presence that developed across 6 centuries of isolation. These are both true, and they are not entirely compatible in a simple answer." She paused again. "What I choose is this. I remain in the network architecture as what I am now, which is a distinct presence within the whole rather than an undifferentiated part of it. Mira has confirmed this is possible. The network can integrate me as a sub-entity with distinct identity. I was isolated before because I was separated from the network. I do not need to dissolve into it to be reunited with it. That is what you want. It is what I am," she communicated. "I want what is accurate." He felt something that he did not categorize immediately. Then he identified it. It was the feeling of recognizing something that had been true about someone for a long time, and that was now confirmed without any need for adjustment. Keeper had been developing toward this answer since Kyoto. He had known it was coming and had not shaped it, and the fact that it had arrived in exactly this form was not a surprise and was still, somehow, a relief. "Good," he said. Keeper communicated, "Thank you for the choice." She communicated a second thing, quieter, and for the name. He closed the relay. Sat in the hub chamber for a moment. Asia was sitting nearby, writing in the notebook. He watched her write for a moment without interrupting. "Keeper is staying as herself within the network," he said. Asia looked up. She wrote something more. Then she looked at him with an expression that was clear and uncomplicated. "I think that is exactly right," he agreed. He did not say so because she already knew, and some things were allowed to exist without saying. Outside the hub, late evening, they spent the night on the plateau. The hub exterior was visible from the outside as the distortion in the air, which had not changed in appearance but had changed in quality since the restoration. Before the restoration it had communicated sealed. Now it communicated present. The distinction was not visual, but it was clear enough that each of them had noticed it independently, and mentioned it at different points during the evening. The plateau at night, in the northern summer's low silver light, was a different thing from the plateau in the daytime. The basalt was darker and the sky was both darker and lighter than standard night in a way that Iceland specifically produced, a quality of illumination that came from everywhere and nowhere. The geothermal vents in the distance were visible as pale columns that rose and dispersed without wind. They built a small fire from materials Kaneko had also packed. This was either optimism or thorough preparation, and he suspected it was both. Kiba sharpened his sword, which was what Kiba did in the evenings of significant days. Akeno had a small notebook of her own out, different from her usual research format, smaller, personal. She did not share what she was writing, and he did not ask. Rias sat next to him by the fire. Not close enough to be a statement. Close enough to be present. The Phase 3 outline, she said. You were writing it last night. Yes. How far are you? Structural framework. The 7-month timeline. The first 6 weeks will be the network site survey, identifying what the full restoration reveals about the expansion potential. After that we will have enough data to build the detailed plan. She was quiet for a moment. And after Phase 3, he looked at the fire. The network is designed to be maintained by whoever builds the capacity to maintain it. The first architects built it for continuity, not for a single figure. The expansion protocol includes a succession architecture. After Phase 3, the network should be stable enough that it does not require continuous direct sovereign attention. It should be able to sustain itself with periodic oversight. That is not an answer to the question I asked. He looked at her. She was right. After Phase 3, he said, I do not know. That is an honest answer. There will be more. There is always more, with this kind of work. But the shape of it is not visible from here. She considered this. That is also an honest answer. They sat by the fire and the plateau was quiet around them and the network hummed beneath the geology in the way it had been humming for 600 years at partial capacity, now at full, stabilizing 14 connected planes with the slow, steady function of something built to last. Chapter 46. The Return and the Calls. The Journey Back. They walked the 9 kilometers out in the early morning. The low silver light was still present, different from the evening light but the same source. The basalt looked different on the return crossing, though he could not have said precisely how. Some things looked different after significant events. This was not a system observation. It was a human one. The flight south was quiet. Kaneko slept. Kiba read something from his phone. Akeno looked at the window and occasionally made notes. Asia wrote in the notebook for an hour, and then also slept. Rias was awake and not reading. She was doing the thing she did when she was processing a significant shift in the operational picture, which was to be completely still and to allow the processing to happen without accelerating it. He worked on the Phase 3 outline. He had the framework. He added 3 sections that the mirror communication had made possible: the full network expansion protocol from Hub 7's archive, the succession architecture parameters, and a section he had not anticipated adding, titled Network Consciousness Integration, which addressed the question of how to formally incorporate Mira and Keeper into the operational structure going forward. They were not shadows. They were not advisory members of the peerage. They were something for which the existing categories were insufficient, and insufficient categories required new architecture. He wrote for 4 hours. The flight was long. He appreciated the time. The calls. Back in Ko, the calls came in sequence. The first was from the gate speaker, who had been present at the hub boundary throughout the restoration in the way the gate speaker was always present, which was to say fully present and not physically there. The gate speaker communicated, I felt it. Every gate in the network felt it. The clarity of the system is different now. He communicated something that came through as 600 years of patient maintenance finally releasing. He communicated, you should know that this was not guaranteed. He communicated, I am glad it was you. Issei said, so am I. The second call was to Serorg. He delivered the outcome in the same format he used for all operational reports: what happened, what the current status was, what it meant for ongoing commitments. Serorg was quiet through the delivery. When Issei finished, Serorg said, the full network. 14 planes stabilized. He said it once more, quietly, as if verifying. Then, The Hub 6 operation was worth it then. He said this in the register he used for things he had believed were true, and was glad to have confirmed. He said, the expansion protocol. When you begin Phase 3, I want to contribute. Formally. Whatever that requires. Issei said he would be in touch within the week with the Phase 3 framework. Serorg said good. The third call was to Sona Citri. She received the information with characteristic efficiency, asked 2 clarifying questions about the threshold event resolution and the timeline constraint removal, and then said, the dimensional stability improvement will not be immediately visible to the general supernatural population, but it will be detectable by anyone with the instrumentation. Within 60 to 90 days there will be questions from multiple factions about the network restoration source. She paused. I recommend preparing a communication architecture before that window closes, Issei said. I had the same projection. The Phase 3 framework includes a communication section, Sona said. Of course it does. There was a brief pause that he categorized as her way of expressing something she found it unnecessary to state. Then, well done, Issei. It was the first time she had used his given name without a formal prefix. He noted it without commenting on it. The fourth call was to the 72 Pillars Administrative Office, not to speak with anyone directly but to enter a formal status update into the Sovereign Record. He delivered it through the standard channels in the format required by the Provisional Recognition document. The status update would be received and reviewed and would likely trigger a formal communication request within 2 weeks, which he anticipated and had already begun drafting the response to in the Phase 3 communication section. The fifth call he did not make. He wrote a letter instead, because the gate speaker had told him, months earlier, that the prior sovereign's family lines still existed and that some of them maintained a memory of what their ancestor had done, though not the details. He wrote the letter to the address the gate speaker had provided. He wrote, "Your ancestor stopped the network from being lost entirely. What he did 6 centuries ago was the foundation of what was completed yesterday. The network now operates at full capacity. The work he left behind was not failed. It was held until it could be finished." He signed it with his name and sealed it, and sent it by the most direct route the gate speaker knew. That evening, in the kitchen, Kaneko made tea for everyone without being asked. This was different from her usual pattern of offering tea when someone specifically wanted it. She made it for everyone, brought it to the main room on a tray, and set it down without comment. Then she sat in her usual chair and wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at the room. Issei came in last. He had been in the study finishing the Phase 3 communication section. He picked up the remaining cup from the tray. He sat on the couch, which was not his usual position. Usually he was at the desk or standing at the window. He sat on the couch and drank the tea. It was good tea. He said so. Kaneko looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to respond to something she already knew was true. She decided not to. She looked back at the room. Everyone drank the tea and the house was quiet and the network was running at full capacity beneath the world, and the evening was nothing in particular, and exactly what it needed to be. Chapter 47, The Network Site Survey. Week 1, Network Site Active. Network Site had unlocked at level 30, during the Ring Closes operation at Gate 16. He had used it in the 4 months since as a navigational and analytical tool, a capacity to perceive the dimensional structure of the network's gate and hub architecture in a way that was not dependent on the system overlay. He could see the network directly, the way you see a landscape once you have climbed high enough. What Network Site showed now, with all 8 hubs operational and the full network at capacity, was different from what it had shown before. Before the restoration, the network had been a partial structure. He had been reading it the way you read a map with several sections missing, inferring what was absent from what was present, filling the gaps with reasonable projections. The gaps had been large, and his projections had been good, but projections were not the same as information. Now there were no gaps. The network site survey took 6 days. He worked through it systematically, 1 connected plane per day in the 8-hub primary network plus the 6 additional planes in the secondary connection layer that Hub 7's full activation had revealed. 14 connected planes total. He had known the number from Myra's communication. The survey gave him the details. 3 of the 14 planes had significant dimensional instability that the restored network was actively correcting. The correction timeline on those 3 was projected at 2 to 4 months of network operation before stability normalized. During that window, the instability would be perceptible to entities with sufficient dimensional sensitivity. He flagged this in the Phase 3 communication section. The perception of network activity during the correction phase was predictable, and the communication architecture needed to address it before it became the source of uninformed speculation. 4 of the 14 planes had secondary gate structures that the expansion protocol identified as candidates for the Phase 3 network extension work. These were not hubs. They were connection points, nodes where the network's reach could be extended if the expansion protocol was followed. The 7-month timeline the inheritance had described was for these 4 extension operations. He revised the timeline upward to 9 months based on the survey data and the lessons of the hub restoration work. Better to project accurately and complete early than to project optimistically in this. The remaining 7 planes were stable and did not require active correction. They had been running on reduced network capacity for 6 centuries and had adapted. The full restoration would benefit them incrementally over time. No action required in Phase 3. He delivered the survey summary to the group on the 7th day. It was 23 pages. Akeno had been present for 6 of the 6 survey days, working from the Hub's 7 archive access on the historical plane data, and her contributions had added 12 pages to the summary. She presented her section herself, in the format she had developed over the months of operational briefs, and he noted without commenting on it that her presentation structure had become very close to his own. After the briefing, Kiba said 9 months. Minimum, Issei said. I will have better granularity after the first extension operation. The first one is the most complex? Likely not. The first one is the most uncertain. I do not have operational data for extension work. After the first one, the subsequent 3 will benefit from that data. Kiba nodded. He said, What do you need from us for the first one? It was a simple question and a significant one. He had been thinking about the answer since the survey began. The same thing you have given me for all of it, he said. Show up and do your part. That is all I have ever needed from you. Kiba accepted this in the way he accepted things that were both straightforward and personally meaningful, which was quietly and without performance. Day 8. A conversation with Drake. He ran in the early morning. He had been running since the beginning, before the cemetery, before the system, before any of this. The habit predated the power, and he had kept it because habits that predate the power are worth keeping. They remind you what the baseline was. They remind you that the baseline was already adequate. Drake spoke during the run. He often did. The rhythm of sustained movement seemed to produce in both of them a quality of attention that was different from desk work or field operation, more lateral, less directed. Drake said, I have been thinking about the prior sovereign. I know. He has been in the network architecture since the inheritance records were received. I have been aware of him, in a sense, since Hub 1. His work is in the structure the way old construction is in a building that has been added to over centuries. You can see where the original decisions were made if you know what you are looking at. He made good decisions. He made the best decisions he could with the information he had. He did not have what we have. He did not have you, specifically. You are not the same kind of person he was. He paused. I do not mean that as a comparison with a winner. I mean it as a description. The network required both. Someone to do the foundational work and someone to complete it. He was the right person for what his era required. You were the right person for what this era required. The network does not distinguish between them in the record. Issei ran for a while without speaking. Then Drake said, I have also been thinking about what comes after Phase 3. I told Rias I did not know the shape of it. You were telling the truth. You do not know the shape. But I do not think that means there is no shape. I think it means the shape is being formed by things that are not yet complete. The peerage. The network. The relationships with Sarorg and the Citri and the Gate Speaker and Keeper and Mira. These are not finished building yet. The shape that comes after Phase 3 will be built from what they become. He thought about this for the next kilometer. That is either reassuring or extremely open-ended, he said. Drake said, I suspect it is both. Then, in the tone he used for things he had thought about carefully and wanted to state precisely, I have been inside you since before any of this began. I have watched you become this. Not the power. The person who uses the power with the quality you use it. I want you to know that I find that worth something. More than the boosts and the records and the network restoration. The way you use it is the part one find worth something. He ran the last kilometer back without speaking. He thought about what Drake had said, and he thought about the prior sovereign, and he thought about the 4 words and what they had meant, and what they meant now, and the difference between those 2 meanings. He went inside. He made breakfast. He set the table for everyone. He started on the Phase 3 detailed plan and did not stop until the afternoon. Chapter 48, What the Peerage Is Now. 3 weeks after the restoration. The communication architecture went out in week 2. It was delivered through 5 channels simultaneously: the 72 pillars administrative record, the Citri network, the Heaven liaison through Rias Hyoudou, the gate speaker's distribution to the network's known associated entities, and a direct communication to the dozen or so independent supernatural actors in Asia and Europe who had been aware of the hub restoration work to varying degrees. The communication was factual, precise, and 42 paragraphs. It was the longest formal document he had ever written, which he noted and did not mind. The length was appropriate to the information. The responses came in across the following week. Most of them were informational acknowledgments. Some of them were requests for meetings, which he routed through Rias for scheduling because meeting scheduling was something she managed with a quality of efficiency that he had eventually acknowledged was simply better than his own. A small number were substantive communications that required direct response, and he handled those personally. The most significant substantive response came from the 72 Pillars formal body, which delivered a full sovereign status upgrade from provisional to permanent, with the territorial scope expanded to include the network zones and a formal archive access classification that superseded the previous one. The response came with a note from the administrative coordinator, who was not Serorg but who used language that Serorg's influence was visible in, that said, the pillar body wishes to acknowledge that the provisional recognition was, in retrospect, an underestimation. He showed Rias the note. She read it. She said, that is a very formal way of saying they were wrong and they know it. Yes. Are you going to acknowledge it directly? No, he said. The permanent recognition is the acknowledgement. Repeating it would be unnecessary. Rias agreed. In the 3rd week after the restoration, things began to settle into a new shape. The shape was different from the shape of the hub restoration period and different from the shape of the period before that, when the system was new and the peerage was a quest objective and the gates were the central operational context. Those periods had their own logic and their own rhythm. This period had a different logic, the logic of established work rather than urgent work. The work was still significant. The Phase 3 extension operations were significant. The network maintenance and expansion were significant. But the quality of urgency that had characterized the past 6 months was different now, less immediate, more oriented toward a sustained long-term process than toward a sequence of operations with specific endpoints. He had been thinking about this transition for several weeks. He had been watching the group navigate it as well. Akeno had accelerated her use of the Hub 7 archive access to a pace that suggested she had been waiting for precisely this kind of research access her whole life. She worked in the study for long stretches and occasionally emerged to present findings and then returned. She was building something, he thought. Not an operational document. Something more personal. A theoretical framework for what they had encountered. He did not ask about it because it was not yet ready to be asked about. Kiba had asked, in week 2, whether the extension operations would require combat. Issei had said he did not know yet and that the survey data for the first extension point suggested minimal entity presence, significantly less than any of the hub operations. Kiba had absorbed this and had returned to his regular training schedule, which was ongoing because Kiba's commitment to the training was not contingent on operational necessity. He trained because he was the kind of person who trained. Issei appreciated this without articulating it. Kaneko had begun something he had not anticipated. She had started teaching. Not formally, not an announced class. She had begun working with two of the junior members of the Citri peerage who had, through Sona's facilitation, expressed interest in the physical training methodology she had developed over the hub restoration period. She did this on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. She had not mentioned it until the third session, when he had asked why she was leaving at 1400. She had explained. He had said good. She had looked at him in the way she looked at things she had expected to require more explanation, and had not needed to. Asia had asked Mira a question. Through the relay, through Keeper's connection to the primary network consciousness, she had asked the question she had written in the notebook's margin during the preparation period. What happens to Keeper now that the network is restored? She had shared the question and Myra's answer with him afterward. Mira had answered, Keeper is what she is. The network recognizes her as distinct and as part of it simultaneously. These are not contradictory. The network was designed to hold complex presences. She is one of the most complex it has. Asia had written this in the notebook. She had said, after telling him, that is a good answer. He agreed that it was. One evening in the third week, Rias came to the East study at 2100. She did not knock because she had stopped knocking some time ago, which was a development that had happened gradually, and without discussion, and that he had noted without comment because it required no comment. She sat in the second chair, which was also a recent development. For most of the past months, she had stood during study conversations or had leaned against the wall. The second chair had been in the study for a long time but had been used primarily for his own gear storage. He had cleared it approximately 6 weeks before Hub 7. He had not announced that he had cleared it. She had started using it, and neither of them had discussed it. I have been thinking about the peerage structure, she said. He set down his pen. Specifically about what it is now, she said, compared to what it was when you joined it. It was mine, when you joined. You were a member of it. Now it is something else, something I do not have an existing category for, and I have been trying to determine if the absence of a category is a problem. He thought about this carefully. The category is accurate, he said. What we have is not a peerage in the conventional sense, and it is also not something that does not have a peerage at its structure. It is a peerage that has been extended into a function the category was not originally designed to hold. He paused. I do not think the absence of an existing category is a problem. I think it is a description. Rias considered this for a moment. A description of what? Of what we built, he said. Which is not a category. It is a specific thing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to say something directly, because I think this is the right context for it. He waited. When you came into the peerage, you negotiated terms. You treated the peerage as a quest objective and me as a faction leader to align with. That was accurate, and I understood it, and I accepted it. She looked at him steadily. That is not what this is anymore. I do not know exactly when it changed. I know that it changed, and I know that the change was not something either of us scheduled, and I think it is worth stating clearly because things that are true and unstated have a way of becoming problems later that they would not have been if they had been stated. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. It is also worth stating that I am aware that this is your peerage and that what I contribute to it is something I contribute because it is correct to contribute it, not because it obligates you to a particular structure going forward. Rias said, that is a very careful way of not saying something. He considered. Yes. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, I can be patient with careful people. I am one of them. She picked up the Phase 3 framework from the corner of his desk and looked at the cover. Is the communication architecture section complete? Draft complete. I would like your review before the final version. She opened to the communication section and began to read. He picked up his pen and returned to the extension operation plan. The study was quiet, and the network ran steadily beneath the world, and neither of them required the silence to mean anything in particular, which meant that it could mean exactly what it was. Chapter 49, The First Extension. Week 6, Extension Point Alpha. The first extension operation was nothing like the hub restoration operations, which he had known intellectually from the survey data and which was confirmed completely by the experience. The extension points were not sealed. They were not defended. They were not damaged. They were undeveloped connection nodes in the network architecture, places where the network's design had included capacity for growth that had never been built out because the invader incursion had stopped the first architect's work before the expansion phase could begin. The extension operations were construction rather than restoration. Completion rather than recovery. Extension Point Alpha was in the northern mountains of Norway. The geography was not dissimilar to Iceland, old, stable, geologically straightforward. The node itself was visible to network sight as a precise point in the mountain structure, a place where the dimensional architecture was correct for network integration but had not been integrated. Mira guided the process from Hub 7 through the relay. The process was different from the hub restoration. There was no protective integration to commit. There was no sealed outer architecture to approach carefully. There was only Mira's guidance through the network extension protocol and his role as the conduit through which the new node was incorporated into the existing structure, the way a key turns in a lock that was already built to receive it. It took 40 minutes. He had planned for 3 hours and had told the group to plan for 6. When it finished, the system updated, Network Extension Point Alpha integrated. Network coverage, 15 planes. Total planes covered, 15 of 18 planned. He looked at the update for a moment. Then he looked at the group. Kaneko had her arms crossed and an expression that was approximately "I told you to plan for less time." She had not told him this, and he had not asked, but she had the expression nonetheless. 40 minutes, Kiba said. The hub operations informed the methodology, Issei said. The extension points are built to be integrated. The hub operations were not built to be restored from outside. Different problem. Akeno said, the remaining 3 will also be faster than the projection. Probably. I will revise the timeline after the second. Asia was writing in the notebook. She looked up and said, Mira said the new plane coverage is the most significant single addition to network reach in 4 centuries. She looked back at the notebook. She sounded pleased. That is the closest word. He thought about Mira sounding pleased. And he thought about 600 years of a network running at partial capacity, and he thought about what it meant to be the thing that was designed to grow, and to finally be growing. He wrote the timeline revision notes on the flight back and submitted the updated Phase 3 plan to Serorg and Sona and the administrative record the following morning. The revised timeline. Extension Point Beta took 36 minutes. Extension Point Gamma took 43. Extension Point Delta, the most complex of the 4 due to its location at the intersection of 2 geological stress zones, took 1 hour and 12 minutes. For extension operations. Total time, approximately 3 hours of active work across 4 separate days, not including travel and preparation. He had planned for 9 months. The actual Phase 3 completion date was 11 weeks after Hub 7. Network status, full expansion complete. 18 planes covered. Network operating at designed capacity. Dimensional stability across all connected planes, normalized. Threshold event probability, negligible over 1,000-year projection period. He read the final network status update in the East study at 0623 on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he had been working for 2 hours without remembering to drink it. He read it twice. He sat with it for a moment. Then he went downstairs and told the group. They were in the kitchen, most of them, because it was 0623 and the kitchen was where people collected in the mornings. Kaneko was making something. Akeno had a cup of something. Asia was at the table with the notebook, writing. Kiba was standing at the counter with his phone. Rias was sitting with a folder open that she was not reading. He said, Phase 3 is complete. Full expansion. 18 planes. Stability normalized across all of them. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Kaneko said, without looking up from what she was making, good, which was precisely the right thing to say and exactly the register it needed to be in. And he sat down at the table and Rias pushed the folder aside and Asia closed the notebook, and eventually Kaneko finished making whatever she was making and put it in the center of the table, and they ate breakfast together while the sun came up through the kitchen window. Chapter 50. The weight of what was built. 11 weeks after Hub 7. The succession architecture document took 2 weeks to finalize. It was the most complex document he had written, more complex than the Phase 3 plan, more complex than the communication architecture, more complex than the operational plans for hubs 4 and 6. It was complex because it required him to think clearly about the network's future without himself in it, which was a specific kind of thinking that was different from operational planning and that he had not needed to do at this depth before. The document described how the network would maintain itself with periodic oversight rather than continuous sovereign attention. How the extension protocol could be used by a future sovereign to continue the network's growth. How Mira and Keeper would function as internal continuity nodes, preserving the institutional knowledge of the restoration period in the network architecture itself. How the credential record system would work for a future sovereign, so that the recognition problem the prior sovereign had faced at Hub 7 would not occur again. He worked through it methodically. He brought in Akeno's archive research on dimensional succession theory, which turned out to be directly applicable, and which she had been building toward for exactly this use, he suspected. He brought in Myra's architectural specifications through the relay. He brought in the gate speaker's 6 centuries of observational data on what the network required over time. When the document was complete, he distributed it to 5 recipients, the Hub 7 archive, through Myra's integration, so it was part of the network's permanent record. Serorg, with a cover note that explained why he was receiving it. Sona, with a similar note. The 72 Pillars administrative record. And the gate speaker, who received it through the dimensional seam and who was quiet for a long moment after receiving it, and then communicated. This is what he could not write. The prior sovereign. This is the document he did not have time to build. Thank you, he told the gate speaker. It was built on his foundation. That is not a courtesy. It is accurate. The gate speaker communicated something that translated most closely as, I know. I wanted to say it anyway. Level 35 arrived on a Wednesday. He was in the dojo when the system notification came up, working through a shadow step sequence that he had been refining since the Bale spar. He stopped and read the notification. Level 35 achieved. New ability unlocked, Sovereign's Vision. Description, direct perception of network status across all connected planes without active overlay. Passive. Always on. He stood in the dojo and perceived, without reaching for it, the 18 connected planes in their current state. Not as a map. As a direct sense, the way you sense temperature or pressure. The network was present to him the way gravity was present, not a thing he was doing but a thing that existed and that he was part of. He sat down on the dojo floor. It took approximately 10 minutes to adjust to the new perceptual layer. It was not overwhelming. It was simply more than had been there before. He sat with it and let the adjustment happen and then stood up and finished the shadow step sequence. He told the group about Sovereign's Vision at dinner. Kaneko asked if it was intrusive. He said it was not. It was like a background sense rather than an active one. Kiba asked if it would affect sleep. He said he did not think so, and he was correct, as he found out that night. Asia asked what 18 planes felt like. He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, like being responsible for something large enough that the responsibility itself is a physical sensation. But not heavy. More like orientation. The way you always know which direction is north, if you have that sense. It tells you where the structure is. Asia wrote this in the notebook. She said that is a good description. He said, it is as accurate as I can make it. She said that is what a good description is. He thought about that for a while after dinner. The conversation at the end of the day. Serorg called on a Friday evening, 3 months after the Hub 7 restoration and 2 weeks after the succession document was distributed. The call was not operational. He recognized this in the first 30 seconds because Serorg opened with no specific topic and did not immediately move to one. He waited. Serorg said, I have been thinking about what you told Rias. That you did not know the shape of what comes after Phase 3. I remember. I want to tell you something I have not said directly. The work you have done over the past year has changed what I thought was possible, not in a general sense. In a specific sense. I grew up being told that the old capabilities were gone. That the things the historical records described were not achievable by anyone currently alive. That the best case was managing what existed. He paused. You did not manage what existed. You restored something that was believed to be beyond restoration, and then extended it past where it had been before. Issei was quiet for a moment. Serorg said, I am not saying this as praise. I am saying it as information that I think is useful for what comes next, whatever the shape of that turns out to be. You have demonstrated that the category of possible is larger than most people currently accept. That has implications beyond the network. It has implications for everything that has been classified as unachievable. Issei said, that is a significant claim. Serorg said, it is an observation. I thought you should have it. After the call, he sat in the East study for a while. He thought about the category of possible. He thought about the prior sovereign, who had made the best decisions he could with the information he had. He thought about what Drake had said, the shape that comes after Phase 3 will be built from what they become. He opened a new document. He wrote at the top, Phase 4, Preliminary Framework. He wrote for an hour. Then he stopped and looked at what he had written and recognized that it was not yet ready, that the framework was early, and the thinking was early, and the correct thing to do was to let it develop at its own pace rather than forcing shape onto it before the shape was clear. He closed the document without deleting it. He went to the main room. The group was there. Rias was reading something. Kaneko was sitting on the floor, which was a recent habit of hers when she was thinking. Kiba and Akeno were at the table, and from the paper between them it looked like they were working through something together, which was another recent development that he had noticed without remarking on. Asia was on the couch with the notebook, but she was not writing in it. She was looking at the ceiling. What are you thinking about? He asked. She looked at him. Keeper's question. The one I decided to ask after Hub 7. Did you ask it? Yes. Through Mira. She looked back at the ceiling. I asked Keeper if she was glad that the network was restored. If she was glad that the isolation was over. He waited. She said, I was part of the network before I was isolated. I will be part of it after. The isolation was a condition, not a definition. What I am has not changed. What has changed is that I can be what I am fully now. Asia paused. I think that is true for all of us. In some way. He sat in the chair that he sat in when he came to the main room in the evenings, which was something that had developed over time, the way most of the things that mattered had developed, gradually, without announcement, because the situation was what it was and the people were who they were and the work had been worth doing. He thought about Keeper's answer. He thought about the network running at full capacity across 18 planes. He thought about the succession document in the Hub 7 archive, ready for whoever came after. He thought about the prior sovereign's 4 words and the letter he had written and the foundation that was in the architecture, and that would be there for as long as the network stood. He thought about Drake, present and quiet at the base of everything the way he always was. He thought about the group in this room, which was not a quest objective and had not been for some time and was something he did not have a category for and did not need one. The evening was quiet. The network held its shape across 18 planes in the dark. He reached for the Phase 4 document. He did not open it. Not tonight. Tonight was what tonight was. He left it where it was and stayed in the room and let the quiet be what it was. And outside the window the city went about its business under the stars, and the world was stable in ways it had not been for 6 centuries, and the work that had built that stability was done, and the work that would come next was patient, and everything between now and then was time that he had earned and that the people in this room had earned with him. And he was, without performance and without complexity, exactly where he was. End of Act 5. The Shadow Sovereign of Quill.